Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back, way back to medieval England, where you're about to find out what life was really like as a serf. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Honestly, just getting through a single week would require more grit than a modern gym warrior pumped up on electrolytes and Spotify hype playlists. But hey, someone's got to milk the cows, dodge the taxes, and wrestle with existential dread in a wool tunic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not out here demanding loyalty like some 14th century feudal lord or anything. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Midnight in Manchester, 9 PM in Tallahassee. I want to know how late you're staying up with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The rooster's cry cuts through the stillness like a dagger to your eardrum. You don't own a clock, but your body does. It knows that crow means it's barely light out and already too late. The sky's still painted a sleepy grey, and your bones protest as you roll out of your straw-stuffed mattress that hasn't been fluffed since, well, ever. Your body aches from the previous day's labour, tilling, hauling, bending, and sweating. You stretch, but not too much. The thatch roof overhead might crumble if you bump it the wrong way, and you're not in the mood to wear spiderwebs today. You slept on a lumpy wooden platform covered with old wool, next to your siblings, and possibly a chicken or two. There's no privacy here, just bodies, warmth, and the lingering aroma of boiled turnip farts from the night before. Outside, the wind whistles through the cracks in your wall, dragging in damp air and a whiff of manure from the cowshed attached to your house. Yes, your house has a cowshed. That's medieval real estate for you. Barn and bedroom, all in one glorious mud-smeared package. You're barefoot the second you hit the floor. Shoes? Nah, that's more of a Sunday luxury. Most days the soles of your feet are your best defence against the biting cold and sharp stones. You step outside and the ground greets you with its usual attitude, cold, sticky, and completely uninterested in your comfort. The path to the fields squelches with early dew and last night's pig droppings. Your first stop is the well. You crank the bucket down, muscles sore and shoulders complaining. The water is freezing and smells faintly of iron and earth, but you splash it on your face anyway. Hygiene is less about sparkle and more about not actively rotting. You drink straight from the pail, spit, wipe your mouth, and turn back toward the cottage where your family's beginning to stir. Inside, your mother's already lighting the fire, coaxing the embers like they owe her money. Breakfast is the usual: coarse rye bread, a dollop of bean paste, and maybe some onion if you're lucky. You chew slowly, deliberately, because there's no second course, and whatever's left, if anything, is saved for the children. Your day's already mapped out by someone else. Lord William of wherever the hell owns the land, the village, and technically you. You're a serf, which is a fancy way of saying legally stuck. You can't leave, can't own property, and can't really say no to anything he demands, unless you're in the mood for fines, beatings, or being forcibly shaved and paraded around like a goat. Today, your job is to weed the Lord's barley field. Not your barley, his. You've got your own tiny patch of soil near your house, more weed than wheat. But that's just your benefit for being born into bondage. Most of your time and effort goes into someone else's crop. That's called labour dues, and it's about as fun as it sounds. As you walk toward the fields with your hoe over your shoulder, a few other villagers join you, eyes bleary, feet dragging. You nod, maybe grunt. Morning conversations are reserved for later, once the sun's warmed things up and the hopelessness has fully kicked in. You spot Thomas, the village oddball, already singing to himself and trying to juggle stones. He once claimed he'd seen a woman turn into a goose. No one believed him, but they all secretly wish it was true. In a place where your biggest excitement is a two-headed turnip, a goose woman would be a celebrity. The field is massive, and the soil is stubborn today. You and the others form rows and begin the monotonous scrape-scrape-pull of weeding. The work is hard, but it has rhythm. Your hands grow numb, your mind wanders. Sometimes you sing, sometimes you argue about how much grain the Lord is skimming, and other times you just zone out to the sound of birds and bees doing their thing while you slowly bake under the rising sun. Around mid-morning a bell rings from the manor. That's not for you. That's for the reeve, the Lord's estate manager, who struts out like he owns the world. He wears shoes, fancy ones. Probably hasn't seen his own toes in years. He strolls through the field, checking on the labour, occasionally shouting vague threats or fake encouragement. He doesn't work, he just makes sure you do. By midday you're starving again. Lunch is more bread and maybe some ale. Weak ale, since clean water's hit or miss. Ale's safe, cheap and strong enough to make you forget your ankle blisters for a few minutes. You sit with your fellow serfs in the shade of a tree, tearing bread with dirt-caked hands and swapping gossip about whose goat escaped and whether the miller is hiding grain again. He probably is. That guy's got shifty eyes. One of the older women starts telling a story about her grandmother, who swore she once dug up a bone that screamed when touched. You know it's nonsense, but you listen anyway. Superstition is seasoning for the soul out here. The world doesn't make much sense, so people fill in the blanks with demons, fairies and haunted cow skulls. It's comforting in a weird way. By sunset, your back is a twisted wreck of knots and aches. The field looks the same as it did this morning, but you know you've made progress because every joint in your body's throwing a tantrum. You trudge back home, past sheep who give you judgmental stares, and a child peeing directly onto a beet. Dinner is the same as breakfast, with maybe a little broth. No meat unless someone's animal dies. You sit with your family, eat in silence, then listen to your father mutter about how things were better under Lord Ethelric, even though everyone knows Ethelric was a total tool. Night falls, and you slip under your threadbare blanket, limbs twitching from overuse. Outside, an owl calls. Somewhere a dog barks. Inside, your sibling coughs for the 100th time. You wonder if they'll make it through the winter. You close your eyes, knowing tomorrow will be exactly the same. No weekends, no breaks, just labour, obligation, and trying not to die too early. Welcome to life as a serf in medieval England. The morning doesn't ask, it demands. Another day, another muddy footpath, another yawn swallowed by the relentless churning of obligation. You wake stiff and sore, same as yesterday, same as every day. The rooster's scream hasn't gotten any prettier, and your straw mattress has evolved from uncomfortable to spine-shaped torture plank. Still, you roll off it because, well, you don't have much say in the matter. You're not so much living on this land as you're part of it, like a tree that sweats and pays taxes. The land is owned by Lord William, or as you mutter under your breath, His Gracious Cow-Faced Excellency. Not that you'd ever say that out loud near the manor. You're a serf, and by law, that means you belong to the land the Lord owns. Not the house, not the field, not even your own hands, really. All of it, all of you, is the property of the estate. You're not free, and it's not subtle. There's this handy Latin phrase, just to rub it in, ad scriptus glebae. It means bound to the soil. It sounds fancier than it feels. Your name is listed with the land records like a shovel or a fence post. You can't leave, can't move, can't even marry someone from another village without the Lord's permission. Want to apprentice your kid to a tradesman in a nearby town? You better ask nicely and offer some kind of bribe. A chicken, a few coins, or maybe just excessive grovelling. Today is not a labour day for the Lord's domain, his personal land, but that doesn't mean you're free. It just means you work your own strip of field, the one you're allowed to cultivate for your family. You head out with your hoe, past your neighbour's cottage, where the shutters hang crooked and a goose pecks idly at someone's discarded shoe. That's Walter's goose. That bird's smarter than most people in the village and meaner than all of them. You nod at it cautiously. The air smells like wet soil, smoke, and something slightly unmentionable. Everything's coated in a thin layer of grime, and your tunic is still damp from yesterday's sweat. It doesn't matter. You've only got one anyway, and washing it means not wearing it, which is its own kind of awkward. Your land is narrow, maybe the width of 2 wagons side by side and long enough that you can't see the end without squinting. This gift of the Lord is yours to work, as long as you keep up with your dues. You till it, sow it, reap it, and then give a chunk of it right back as rent. It's not just crops. You owe labour on the manor's land, fees for using the mill, taxes to the church, and every now and then, an entirely random fee because the Lord needs a new horse or a set of imported chess pieces. Honestly, you'd probably be fine with it if the rules were fair. But the rules are flexible, and they always bend away from you. You recall when old Geoffrey was fined for trespassing on his own field because his ox wandered a few paces into the Lord's barley. The reeve, basically the foreman of feudal nonsense, claimed Geoffrey owed 5 pence and a chicken. Geoffrey had no pence and no chicken, so he gave up his son's boots. They didn't fit the reeve, but he took them anyway. There's a rhythm to this life, sure. but it's the kind that slowly grinds you down like a millstone on grain. Day after day of working a piece of land you don't own, for a lord you rarely see, under laws you didn't write. And the worst part, you're not even the lowest on the ladder. That would be the cotters, landless folk who scrape by on scraps and live on the edge of starvation. Or the slaves, though they're rarer these days. You at least have a patch of earth. A place to break your back in semi-privacy. Mid-morning you pass by the manor house. It towers. Well, as much as anything can tower in a village built of timber and mud. It's stone, 2 stories high, and probably has windows with actual glass. Word is, the lord has a feather bed and a privy that empties into a stream. Pure wizardry. You once glimpsed the lady of the manor riding a palfrey, her hands wrapped in embroidered gloves. Her skin was pale, untouched by sun or hardship, like she was carved out of candle wax. You stop to scratch your ankle, which is red and swollen from yesterday's ant ambush. While doing so, you're approached by Joan, the widow from 3 cottages over. She's carrying a basket of herbs and looks like she hasn't slept since Pentecost. She tells you the manor is raising the labour dues again. You just stare at her. No surprise. The reeve probably convinced the lord that weeds are getting harder to pull and that peasants need more motivation. Joan leans in and whispers, "I heard one of the villains at Whittlebury ran off. Vanished. They say he's in Norwich now. Took a new name." That's dangerous talk. But it flickers something warm and dangerous in your chest. Hope. And that's the cruelest luxury of all. Later that day, while hauling water back to your field, you pass the tithing post where a few notices are nailed up. Not that you can read them. Most people can't. But you recognise the seal of the bishop, which usually means more money owed, or another day of fasting that conveniently lines up with someone's wedding feast. There's also a note about a travelling friar who's coming through next week. That's something to look forward to. He usually brings tales from far-off places like London and York. He also smells like cinnamon and sells charms that may or may not keep your cow from dying. As you lean your bucket down, a memory floats up. Something your grandfather said long ago before his back gave out and his mind drifted into cloudy muttering. He said, "The land doesn't love you back. It just tolerates you while you feed it." At the time, you didn't understand. Now, you get it. You give everything to this place. Your sweat, your children, your very name. And in return, you get dirt under your nails and the occasional turnip that isn't mouldy. There's an old debate in the village, one of those philosophical arguments that never goes anywhere. It's about whether serfs are better off than free labourers in the towns. The free folk don't owe labour to a lord, but they're crushed under guilds, taxes and rent. Serfs have security, sure. You won't be evicted. But is that security worth the shackles? You stare out at your strip of land, the weeds creeping back already, and you're not sure. Maybe the town's a cage too, just a shinier one. As the sun dips low and casts the field in gold, you trudge home, bucket sloshing, arms numb. Tomorrow the reeve will come again, and you'll be back on the domain, bent over someone else's grain. For now, you sit by the hearth, eat your stew, and let the ache in your muscles do the talking. The land owns you, and it's not even pretending to apologise. The next morning arrives with the subtle grace of a punch to the ribs. There's no sunrise meditation or artisanal breakfast bowl waiting for you. Just the same stale breath, the same cold air leaking through the doorframe, and the ever-present aroma of damp wool and wet ash. And taxes. Not the smell of them, but the looming, inescapable presence. Like someone's left the door open and let the concept of taxes live rent-free in your brain. You stretch, if it can even be called that. It's more of a reluctant unravelling. Your shoulder clicks, your knees ache, you stand upright and feel like a bundle of sticks tied loosely together. But you move because if you don't, the system starts charging you for the privilege of existing. And today, lucky you, is one of those glorious days that reminds you your entire body is, legally speaking, a taxable asset. You shuffle outside to relieve yourself behind the house, carefully avoiding the neighbour's pig. It eyes you like it knows too much. Once you're done, you head to the village centre where the bailiff is already barking instructions and the reeve, local enforcer of the Lord's will, is lurking around with his little notebook of doom. It's not actually a notebook, more like a wax tablet and stylus, but it feels like he's writing your sins down for future punishment. Today is Tallage Day, or Fun Tax Day, as nobody calls it. The Lord has summoned additional funds for some reason. Maybe he wants to host a feast, or buy a new warhorse, or bribe a bishop. Who knows? You're not told why, only how much. The village must pay a lump sum, and how it's divided up, that's the reeve's job, which means your family gets a chunk roughly equivalent to 1.5 chickens and your soul. If you can't pay in coin, you pay in kind. That might mean a jug of ale, a few sacks of grain, or a goat, assuming you even have a goat. If you're really unlucky, you get assigned more labour, and no, you don't get to choose what kind. One year, you had to carry stones up a hill for a wall that still hasn't been finished. Another time, you helped rebuild the mill after a storm blew the roof off, only to be charged later for using it. There's also the church tithe, which you're supposed to pay every year. That's 1/10 of everything you produce. Harvest 10 sacks of barley, one goes to the church. Have 10 piglets, the church gets a piglet. Bake 10 loaves, hope God likes carbs. The local priest is a decent man, all things considered, but even he can't bend canon law. And when he reminds you that these offerings are for your eternal soul, you smile and nod while wondering what a soul actually costs on the open market. Midday rolls around, and the tax collectors arrive from the nearby town. They come in on horses, actual horses, not shaggy, half-starved ponies like yours, and they wear cloaks with little emblems that mean, "Don't mess with me." One of them is clean-shaven, with hands that clearly haven't seen a plough in their entire privileged life. He announces the assessed value of the village's dues and makes a point of sighing when someone hands him muddy coins. Your neighbour, Agnes, tries to pay her portion with salted fish, and the collector wrinkles his nose like she's insulted his lineage. "That's not acceptable," he says in a voice that makes you want to accidentally dump a chamber pot on him from a second-story window. Unfortunately, there are no second stories in the village, and the only pot is currently being used by your grandfather. So you step forward and offer to take on some of Agnes's labour in exchange for a small pouch of barley. It's not altruism, it's strategy. If you can stay in good standing with your neighbours, they'll back you the next time your pig gets sick or your roof caves in. In this world, kindness is transactional. Community is the only insurance policy you've got. Once the collectors are gone, the village lets out a collective sigh. No one's happy, but at least it's over, for now. You head to the fields with your hoe, your arms still tired from yesterday, and your mood somewhere between irritated and existential. You keep thinking about that ledger the reeve carries around. Every transaction, every labour assignment, every debt, he writes it all down. But there's no entry for how many times your back has cracked in the middle of a wheat row. No line for every cold morning you've worked while coughing up what might be consumption. Just numbers, debits and duties. You pass the village mill and hear the wheel creaking, its slow turn matching the beat of your day. The miller's son is there, sitting outside with his legs swinging and a smug grin plastered across his face. His family skims flour from every sack. Everyone knows it, but no one does anything. The miller's cousin is the reeve's wife. Coincidence, surely. You keep walking, better not to dwell. There are still potatoes to dig up and a fence to mend. You've got a pig with a limp that needs watching, and your youngest daughter tore her only tunic last night while playing too close to the fire. You'll need to patch it with something. Maybe the sackcloth you've been hoarding under your bed, meant for winter grain storage. Choices, always choices, and never the kind you want to make. As the day winds down, you meet with a few villagers near the common pasture to discuss something the reeve said in passing. That the king is demanding more troops from each manor. That might mean more taxes. Or worse, conscription. You're not a fighter, you're a farmer. You wield a hoe, not a sword. But the crown doesn't always care about job descriptions. Someone tells a story about a neighbouring village where the tax collector was chased out by a mob and tossed into a dung heap. You all laugh too hard at that one. It's not just funny, it's aspirational. Back at home, you sit near the hearth with your bowl of pottage, beans, a little onion, and whatever scraps didn't rot in the cellar. You tear your bread slowly, dipping it, savouring the taste not because it's good, but because it's food. You watch your children eat, your wife stir the pot for tomorrow's meal, and for a moment things don't feel so heavy. The tax is paid, for now. The fire is warm, for now. A rat skitters across the floor, bold and shameless. You don't bother chasing it. Let it have the crumbs. You've already given away everything else. Your body may be strong, your hands calloused and capable, but they are not your own. They're part of the machine, a system that values what you produce more than what you are. You fall asleep to the distant hoot of an owl and the ever-present thought that next week, next month, there will be more. More work, more demands, more dues. Your life is a ledger, and the ink never stops flowing. The sun isn't up yet, but your day is already underway. The fire in the hearth never fully went out last night, and you stir its embers back into reluctant life, while your joints creak like rusted hinges. Your breath hangs in the cold air, visible proof that warmth has to be earned here, one twig and spark at a time. Before you do anything else, you check the food stores. Not because you expect a surprise, there's no medieval Amazon delivery coming, but because you're hoping the turnips haven't started sprouting again. One of them has. You sigh and set it aside. That'll be tomorrow's problem. The morning meal is plain, bread from yesterday, hard enough to dent your front teeth, and a ladle of thin pottage that tastes like regret and a whisper of cabbage. You let the youngest eat first, then your wife, then the rest of the family in whatever order the hunger dictates. You're last. Always last. The Lord may take your work, but hunger takes your patience, and you've learned to swallow both without complaining. Today isn't a work day for the Lord, nor is it tallage collection or some mandatory village repair task. Today is for your own fields, or at least the little strip of land you're allowed to grow food on. It's not much, narrow as a blanket, rocky, temperamental, but it's yours to feed your family. Kind of. Technically, the land still belongs to Lord William, and so does everything on it. But in practice, you tend it as if it were sacred, because it's the only thing standing between you and starvation. You shoulder your hoe and head out through the low morning fog. It hugs the village like a wet cloak, and the sound of distant coughing cuts through the stillness. Old Thomas, probably. He's been hacking since last harvest, and everyone's quietly taken bets on whether he'll make it through winter. You're not sure what the prize is, other than slightly more firewood to go around. As you reach your field, the soil's damp underfoot. Not bad for planting peas, if it doesn't rain again and flood everything like it did 3 years ago. You still remember that season. Crops drowned, children got sick, and one family had to boil their leather shoes to make broth. You helped them, sharing what little you had. It bought you goodwill, but nearly cost you your own health. You work methodically, breaking the ground, clearing stones, and dropping seeds with practiced precision. Your hands move on their own, more muscle memory than conscious thought. It's meditative in a way. The only sound is the occasional bird and the scraping of your hoe. For a moment it's just you and the land, and you can almost forget the hierarchy looming over everything like a bad smell. Your lunch is eaten in the field, a hard-boiled egg, a chunk of bread, and a sip of thin ale from a goatskin flask. You eat quickly, not because you're in a rush, but because food left out too long attracts flies, and you've already accidentally crunched enough bugs this month. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve and keep working. Mid-afternoon, your neighbour Alice passes by on her way to the stream. She's hauling laundry and muttering something about her daughter's ruined shift. She pauses to gossip, and you oblige, if only for the mental break. She tells you that the priest has been preaching harder than usual, warning everyone about the sin of gluttony, which is hilarious, considering most of you haven't eaten meat in weeks, unless you count dried fish with more bones than flesh. The conversation drifts to food, naturally. It always does. What people ate at the last village wedding, what herbs work best in stew, whether someone's secretly keeping chickens and hiding the eggs. Everyone's watching everyone because food is survival, and survival is competition dressed up as neighbourliness. Your own diet? It's as predictable as the sunrise. Barley bread, dried peas, onions, leeks, and more barley bread. Maybe some cabbage or turnips if the season's good, or if you've been clever enough to sneak a few extra rows into your allotment without the reeve noticing. You might have a bit of salted pork on a holy day, assuming the pig cooperates with not dying early. Mostly, though, you live on the holy trinity of serf cuisine, bread, beans, and blind hope. You don't think much about nutrition. No one does. You eat to stop the gnawing in your belly, not to balance your vitamins. Scurvy? That's just a rich person's word. If your teeth fall out, you deal with it. If your stomach aches, you sleep it off. If someone dies during Lent, the priest says they were taken by God and everyone nods. Quietly, though, you suspect it was the spoiled lentils. Your cooking setup is humble. A single iron pot over the hearth, a few wooden bowls, and a spoon that's older than you. Your wife manages miracles with that pot. She can make roots taste like a meal, stretch one onion across a week, and still have enough energy left to scold the children and fix your shirt with twine. She's the reason your house hasn't crumbled, literally and emotionally. There's a debate in the village about whether leeks or onions are better for healing colds. Alice swears by leeks, while Matthew, the carpenter's apprentice, claims onions ward off demons. He keeps one tied to his belt like a talisman. You're not convinced, but you haven't caught a cold this season, and you did steal an onion from him last month. So maybe he's onto something. As the day ends, you gather what little you've harvested and make your way back home. The sun is slipping behind the hills, casting long golden shadows that turn the world soft and forgiving, just for a moment. It almost looks peaceful, like something out of a travelling friar's sermon. Almost. Your wife's already stoked the fire. The children are bickering quietly over a bone they've carved into a toy. You wash your hands with cold water and a piece of sand-dusted cloth, scrape the dirt from your nails and sit beside the fire to mend your belt. The leather's cracking, but if you tie it tight enough, no one will notice. Dinner is barley stew with wild greens. No one says much while eating. Everyone's tired, but not unhappy. It's the kind of quiet that's not quite peace, but not despair either. Just the usual end-of-day fatigue that settles over you like a well-worn cloak. Later that night, as you lie down beside your wife and listen to the wind whisper through the cracks in the wall, your stomach growls faintly, but it's not unbearable. You've eaten enough to sleep, and that's a luxury not everyone in your village has tonight. Your dreams are the same as always. Fields that don't flood, animals that don't die, a loaf of bread so big it feeds your whole family for a week. In the dream, you eat until your belly is full, and you laugh without fear. In the real world, your belly's not full, but you're still laughing. Quietly. Because your youngest just kicked you in the shin in her sleep, and muttered something about cabbages winning a race. Life, even in all its harshness, has a few strange comforts, and bread, for all its monotony, still tastes like survival. The first sound you hear the next morning is the clash of hooves on the village path, sharp and too early. Not the usual clopping of a farmer's pony or the creaky wheelbarrow trundling along. No, this is faster, louder, and paired with the huffing breath of a horse that was made to run hard. That's never a good sign. You sit up in bed, rubbing your eyes and nudging your wife awake with a murmured, "Someone important's here," which makes her groan and roll over. Outside, the village is already gathering like bees around a broken hive. People step cautiously from their homes, pulling cloaks tight, faces wrinkled with suspicion. You join the slow trickle toward the green, where the manor's steward, a short, pale man with an impressive sneer, is reading off a parchment with all the enthusiasm of a bored hangman. You're barely awake, and already your guts are sinking. By decree of Lord William, no villager shall take timber, branches or firewood from the eastern woods without formal leave. All previous privileges are hereby revoked. Murmurs rise like smoke. The eastern woods have been your lifeline for years. Everyone takes from them kindling, mushrooms, wild berries, the occasional hare if you're lucky and quiet. You're not poachers, you're just cold. The steward continues without looking up. Any breach will result in a fine of 3 pence or equivalent labour. He rolls up the scroll like he's done being reasonable, which is funny because he never started. Then he trots off, leaving the reeve to deal with the crowd that's not quite angry but no longer polite. You don't yell, though part of you wants to. You just turn and walk back toward your home, grinding your teeth the whole way. That new decree is going to hit hard when winter deepens. Wood is life. Without it, you freeze, or you get sick from damp air, or your children do. It's just another reminder. Your daily choices aren't yours. Even the basics, warmth, food, shelter, are permitted, not guaranteed. You don't live under laws, you live under permissions. They can be given, and they can be snatched away. Later that morning you're summoned. Not just you, but most of the men in the village. The manor fields need clearing. Some storm broke part of a fence and scattered debris across the barley plot. Not your field, his, but the labour is yours. You tighten the cords of your cloak, grab your spade and head out like the obedient worker you are. This is the part that really gnaws at you. There's no refusal. You can't say no. Well, you can say no, but then comes the fine, or the public scolding in front of the manor court, or a few extra days of work tacked on quietly when no one's looking. The system doesn't need chains. It has customs. Everyone knows their place, and if they forget, there's always the reeve to remind them with a carefully tallied, "Oops, looks like you're behind on your duties." You reach the fields, and the damage isn't terrible, but it's tedious. Broken branches, scattered hay, part of a fence post snapped in half like a toothpick. You and the others spread out and start collecting debris, stacking it into piles for burning later. The wind is brisk, making your fingers numb, but you don't stop. Not because you're a hero, but because you don't have a choice. While working, you hear a story from Henry, the blacksmith's son. Apparently someone over in Grafton was punished for marrying without the Lord's permission. The marriage was annulled, and the groom was fined a whole pig and 3 days of labour. You pause mid-lift, incredulous. For marrying, you ask. Henry nods. They said she was from another manor, property of a different lord. It hits you again, as it does often, but never gently. You're not a person in the eyes of the law, you're an asset. A breathing, walking, slightly smelly tool of the estate. Even love needs permission. You think about your own wedding day. It was small. A priest under a tree, a jug of ale passed between hands, and your wife's smile. Sharp, tired, but full of something real. You didn't ask for permission. You just did it. And somehow, no one stopped you. Maybe the reeve was drunk that week. By late afternoon, the work is done. Mostly. You walk back with the others, mud clinging to your feet, your back a symphony of aches. There's no payment, no thanks, not even a nod. This is just customary duty, just what you're supposed to do. As you pass the manor, you spot the Lord's dogs lounging in the sun, fat, pampered things. Their collars look more expensive than anything you own. One of them yawns. It's hard not to take it personally. Evening brings a bitter chill, and with the eastern woods now off limits, you resort to scouring the ditches for any dry brush or wind-blown twigs. You find a few and stuff them into your tunic, ignoring the sharp poke of a splinter against your ribs. You're not the only one. Others are doing the same, pretending not to see each other. No one wants to admit how desperate things are getting. Dinner is thin again, stew made from the same onions and beans you've been recycling all week. Your wife throws in a bit of stale bread to thicken it. It helps. The kids eat fast, which is both flattering and concerning. You save the last spoonful for your oldest son, who's growing faster than your garden ever will. After the meal, your wife mends a shirt by candlelight while you sit beside her, sharpening a dull knife on a stone that's more wish than tool. You talk about nothing. Weather, gossip, the priest's sermon. It's not deep, but it's warm. Conversation is one of the few things no one can tax. That night, you lie awake a little longer. You think about how every part of your life is tracked, taxed, or tethered. Your hands plant seeds that feed others. Your time fills barns you don't own. Even your thoughts have borders, hemmed in by custom and fear. There's an old tale the reeve once mocked, a story of a man who dug a tunnel from his village to the woods, living underground until he reached freedom. You always thought it was nonsense, but now, staring at the rafters, listening to the wind howl through the holes in your roof, you find yourself imagining it again. Not because it's realistic, but because imagining freedom, even briefly, feels like borrowing a breath of someone else's air. And that sometimes is enough to fall asleep. There's no such thing as a secret in your village, not because people gossip, which, to be fair, they absolutely do, but because the walls are thin, the homes are packed, and privacy is about as real as unicorns. You cough, and 3 people say, "Bless you," before you've finished. You sneak out for a romantic tryst behind the bakehouse, and someone's goat-watching cousin spots you before the first kiss. Even your thoughts feel louder here. You wake to the sound of raised voices outside, which means someone's ox got loose again, or someone's accusing someone else of hoarding eggs. You crack the door open just in time to see Margaret, the alewife, hurling a wooden spoon at her son. He ducks with the elegance of a child well versed in dodging maternal projectiles. You chuckle, then immediately stop yourself. Laughing in the morning only invites bad luck. Your wife joins you, squinting at the thin light edging over the trees. "It's going to rain," she says, which is how she greets most days, and she's usually right. The sky here always looks like it's making up its mind. The clouds hang low, heavy, the same colour as damp wool. The kind of weather that makes your bones hum with old injuries. You head to the well, passing houses that look more or less like yours, wattle and daub, low-thatched roofs, sagging like they too are tired of this life. The paths between them are little more than muddy veins where everyone's business flows freely. You nod to your neighbours and they nod back, eyes dull but alert. Everyone's watching, always. Because in this village, you don't live alone. You exist in the middle of a constant, unending group project, where the grading system is invisible but ruthless. You drop your bucket into the well and pull up water that smells faintly of iron and desperation. Someone behind you clears their throat. It's Edith, the thatcher's widow. and the unofficial village archivist of everything everyone's ever done wrong. She leans in like she's about to reveal state secrets. "Did you hear about Robert and the Reeves' niece?" she whispers, grinning with the kind of delight only scandal can deliver. You raise an eyebrow. "No." "Well," she says, looking around for dramatic effect, "they were caught in the barn, rolling in the hay. Twice." You blink. "Twice in the same barn?" "No," she says smugly. "2 different barns." She gathers her shawl like a magician after a final trick and walks off, her morning now complete. By the time you return home, your wife has already heard the story from someone else. She smirks, and you both share a silent look that says, "We should probably pretend to care, but let's not." You eat breakfast in near silence, except for the children bickering about who got the larger piece of onion in their bowl. You can't prove who's right, so you finish the onion yourself to settle the matter. Father of the Year. Today's task is repairing a bit of the village wall, a humble defence made mostly of thorn bushes and wishful thinking. The hedgerow has been breached, likely by an adventurous pig or a determined child. Either way, someone trampled it, and now it needs patching. You and 3 other villagers head out with spades, saplings, and a vague plan. Along the way, you talk, because if you didn't talk, the silence would swallow you. Thomas tells a story about his cousin who went to York and saw a market where people sold sweet pastries the size of your head. Agnes rolls her eyes and mutters that it's probably a lie. Geoffrey, ever the philosopher, wonders aloud whether rich people have to go to the loo like the rest of us. You all agree they do, but probably in gold pots. By midday, you've patched a decent stretch of the wall and have a few scratches to prove it. Your hands are sore, your boots are soaked, and you're starting to smell like wet moss. But there's something oddly satisfying about it. You worked together, got something done, and nobody cried, bled, or died. In a medieval village, that's a win. Afterward, the 4 of you sit in the grass to eat. Your lunch is a crust of bread and a bit of soft cheese you've been saving. You share it, of course, because sharing food is the unwritten rule. It's not about generosity, it's about survival. If you hoard today, no one shares tomorrow, and tomorrow might be the day your cow gives up the ghost. The conversation drifts into deeper waters. Someone brings up the old sin-eater from 3 villages over. You've never seen him, but rumours say he can pull the sins right out of a dying man's soul, swallowing them like breadcrumbs. He gets paid in bread and beer. "So," Thomas says, mouthful, "he eats sin. But how do we know it works?" You all sit in silence for a second, staring at the grass. "No idea," Agnes says finally, "but it's a good job. Free food, no taxes, no marriage duties." Everyone laughs. It's not funny, really, but laughter keeps the rot out. You lean back, eyes half closed, letting the weak sun warm your face. For a moment, you imagine you're somewhere else. Not a serf, not a bound man, just a person lying in a field with friends, full belly, warm feet, no duties, no lord, no debt. But the moment doesn't last. As you walk home that evening, you pass the Reeves' house and spot his niece. Yes, that niece, sweeping the doorway. She doesn't look guilty or scandalised. She just looks tired. Same as you. Probably already tired of being a rumour. Back home, your wife is making something ambitious. A stew with turnips, beans and dried herbs. It smells like heaven, or at least like something you haven't had in a while. You kiss her on the cheek and she grumbles at you with a smirk. The children are playing a game with sticks and stones, shouting rules that change every 30 seconds. No one wins. That's part of the game. After dinner, you sit by the fire with your wife, sharpening tools and listening to the wind rattle the shutters. She asks if you've heard about the Reeves' niece. You lie and say no. Not because you care, but because you'd rather not keep the cycle going. You let the village swirl around you, but tonight you choose silence. Lying in bed later, one child snoring on your stomach, another curled behind your knees, you stare up at the rafters and listen to your wife's breathing even out beside you. The village may know everything, but in this one square of straw and skin and breath, you have peace. And in a world where even your time is taxed, peace, however brief, is its own kind of rebellion. You don't go to church because you feel especially holy. You go because not showing up guarantees trouble. If you're lucky, it's just a stern look from Father Amen. If you're not, it's a public rebuke mid-sermon, where he names your sins aloud in that calm, terrifying voice of his that makes you want to sink into the stone floor like a guilty worm. So today, Sunday, you rise early, wipe the worst of the grime from your hands and face, and don the least wrinkled tunic you own. which is saying something. The church bell starts its lazy toll just after sunrise, echoing across the village like a call to judgment. Its rope is frayed, its bell cracked, and it's always slightly off-key, which feels poetic given the state of everyone's souls. You walk with your family down the damp path to the church, boots squelching in familiar mud, dodging a goose that clearly thinks it owns the road. The building itself is the oldest thing in the village besides Agnes and possibly the pig that lives under the grain loft. It's small, stone, and cold, with narrow windows and a smell that's part incense, part mildew, and part sweat-soaked repentance. The walls are decorated with faint, crumbling images of saints and demons that you've stared at since childhood, half terrified, half bored. There's a painting of St. Sebastian full of arrows that gives your youngest nightmares, but you keep coming anyway. Because this place isn't just where you worship, it's where you find out everything. You sit on the hard wooden bench, pressed shoulder to shoulder with people you know too well. Behind you, someone coughs. In front of you, the Reeves niece shifts uncomfortably. At the front of the church stands Father Eamon, as thin and dry as a winter twig, his voice sharp enough to peel bark. The sermon begins with hellfire, as always. Apparently too many people have been idle. Sloth, he says, is a sin that invites the devil in through the back door. You bite your tongue. Idleness isn't even an option in this life. But you know better than to argue with a man whose belt includes both a rosary and a switch. Then comes the real reason you're here. News. Church is the medieval equivalent of the local bulletin board, town square, social network, and emergency alert system. All rolled into one uncomfortable hour of standing, kneeling, and mumbling the right words at the right time. Father Eamon reads announcements from the bishop, from the manor, and from the crown, depending on who's shouting loudest that week. Today he announces a new holy day of fasting. Great. That means less food on a Wednesday and more guilt if you cheat. He also reminds everyone about the pilgrimage tax, just in case anyone forgot that even salvation has a price tag. Then he mentions something interesting. A friar is passing through next week. He brings with him relics, letters from the abbey, and tales from the wider world. That perks you up. These travelling friars are like the medieval version of a Netflix drop. They bring gossip from towns you've never seen, news of kings and queens, stories of miracles and monsters. Last time one visited, he told of a woman who bled milk and a bishop who exploded during Mass. Probably nonsense, but still, better than staring at the turnips and wondering if you'll have enough to make soup again. After the sermon, there's a prayer and a final blessing that sounds more like a warning. Everyone begins to shuffle out, murmuring to one another, exchanging news, making plans. You hang back a little, not in a rush. Outside, the village green fills up with small groups breaking into whispered circles. You overhear a conversation about someone's cow giving birth to twins. Good luck, they say, unless they both die, in which case it's a curse. Another group's debating whether the bishop really expects another tithe this month. If he does, someone mutters, he better start milking my sheep himself. You smile, just a little. These Sunday gatherings are the only social time you really get. There are no taverns in your village, no dance halls, no parks. This is where deals are made, promises exchanged, marriages arranged, and judgments quietly passed behind closed lips. Someone jokes that the miller's new assistant looks like he was carved out of spoiled cheese. Everyone laughs a bit too loud. You find your wife talking to Alice near the bake oven. They're trading gossip and bread starter, which might be the most powerful currency in the village. You catch just enough of the conversation to hear the words plague and across the river, and your gut tightens. Plague rumours never truly leave, even when they're false. The memory of past outbreaks still lingers like a shadow no one wants to name. You gather your family and head home. Along the way, your eldest asks why Father Eamon always talks about hell more than heaven. You pause, then say something vague about fear keeping people from doing bad things. Inside, you wonder if that's true, or if fear just keeps people still. Back home, the rest of the day is quiet. Sundays are technically a day of rest, but rest still involves fetching water, tending to animals, and preparing food for the week. The sky stays grey, and you spend the afternoon mending a fence post and watching your youngest chase a stick like it owes her money. Evening brings stew, slightly thicker than usual thanks to a carrot someone gifted your wife in exchange for mending a hem. You sit around the fire, tired but full enough. The children play a game involving stones and whispered curses. Your wife hums under her breath while stitching up a hole in your shirt. You think about the friar who's coming, about what news he might bring. Maybe he'll say the war is over. Maybe he'll bring word of some great change, some shift in the world that reaches even this tiny patch of England. You don't expect much. But even the idea of something new is like a candle in the dark. Before bed, you kneel for a quick prayer, not because you feel particularly pious, but because it's what you've always done. You ask for health, for food, for dry weather, for your children's safety, for a little mercy in a life that doesn't give much of it. Then you lie back on the straw, listen to the wind outside, and wonder what the friar will look like. Whether he'll smell like rosemary and miracles, or just more mud and old stories. And whether the stories he tells will make you feel bigger, or remind you just how small you really are. The first time you ever looked forward to a holy day, you were about 8, and someone promised honey cakes and dancing. You got neither. It rained sideways for most of the day. Your mother was stung by a bee trying to fetch herbs, and the only thing that danced was your father's knee as he bounced in pain from stepping on a pitchfork. Still, there was no work, and back then that was magic. These days it's mostly just wet. Holy days are the closest thing you have to time off, if you count fasting, standing for hours in church, and being judged by your neighbours for blinking too much during the priest's sermon as off. But technically, yes, you're not expected to be in the fields today. That doesn't mean you're lounging in bed sipping broth. Your cow still needs feeding. Your fence still has that one post trying to escape sideways. And your wife has decided that holy days are perfect for scouring everything with vinegar and commentary. You roll out of bed to the sound of children arguing and the faint clatter of someone trying to light a fire in damp kindling. You help get it going, trading swears with the chimney smoke that refuses to go anywhere but sideways into your lungs. Eventually the flames catch, and you all take turns warming your fingers, holding them out like sun-starved mushrooms desperate for light. This holy day is in honour of some saint you've never met and know little about. Saint Egbert or Elbert or Eggbeard, depending on who you ask. What he did to deserve a feast is vague, something about sheep and chastity. But the important part is that the Lord himself has given permission for rest. The Lord Steward, of course, is exempt from rest, and is already pacing the green like a crow in a tunic, checking that no one is secretly sneaking off to weed their turnips for an edge over the others. After a quick meal of leftover stew and dry bread, you head to the village church. Everyone's dressed just a little nicer today, which isn't saying much. It mostly means the tunics have fewer visible patches and marginally less hay clinging to them. You spot at least 3 men wearing what appear to be their wives' cloaks. Fashion is flexible when you're broke. Father Eamon is already at the front, his voice bouncing off the stone walls with righteous urgency. He loves holy days. More souls, more confessions, more chances to tell people they're living wrong. Today he's particularly fired up. He talks of the saint's purity, his commitment to poverty, and his willingness to suffer for the glory of heaven. You can't help but glance down at your own ragged tunic and think, well, I must be halfway to sainthood myself. After the sermon, the church spills out onto the green, and for a few blissful hours it almost feels festive. The baker's wife has brought a small barrel of ale, watered down but still warm and sweet, and someone's playing a battered lute badly enough to be charming. Children run in circles chasing dogs, or possibly being chased. It's unclear. Someone brings out a puppet show, rude, exaggerated versions of manor life where the lord is a drooling buffoon and the reeve gets dunked in a pig trough. Everyone laughs, including the reeve himself, though his smile looks like it's been sewn on by force. It's the one day he can't find people for mockery, so he pretends to enjoy it, for the good of the community. There's a sort of unspoken rule on these days. Grudges get a day off too. People who haven't spoken in weeks share bread or ale. A man you argued with over boundary lines last week offers you a dried apple slice with barely a trace of smugness. It doesn't last, of course. Tomorrow someone's pig will eat someone's beans, and we're back to square one. But for now, peace. The children are roped into a circle dance that quickly devolves into a sort of joyful stampede. You join in only when your youngest insists, tugging your hand with the strength of someone possessed by sugar and freedom. You twirl, half laughing, half dizzy, and forget for a moment that your back hurts and you haven't had a real bath in months. Your wife watches from the side, arms crossed but smiling. She rarely joins these things. She prefers quiet. But when someone offers her a honey cake, a real one, not the imaginary treat from your childhood, she accepts and eats it slowly, eyes closed as if she's tasting something sacred. By mid-afternoon, the clouds gather like gossipers, and the sky shifts from light grey to something more serious. The rain starts slow but steady, driving people under trees, porches, and inside the church again. No one's surprised. It wouldn't be a holy day without mud. Still, the mood doesn't break entirely. Someone starts telling stories under the eaves, tales of saints who tamed wolves, angels disguised as beggars, and a man who once built a flying machine from goose feathers and broke both legs on his first attempt. The children listen, eyes wide. You've heard them all before, but they still make you grin. Later that evening, you're back at home, warming wet clothes by the hearth. The fire pops with damp wood, and the room smells like wet wool and onions. Your wife hums to herself, cooking up a broth with the day's few leftovers, while the children pass out one by one like little sacks of potatoes. The youngest has honey on her cheek and a scrape on her elbow, and both seem to please her equally. You sit with your wife and talk about nothing. The rain, the priest's new candle hat, the friar's expected arrival. You ask if she enjoyed the honey cake. She nods and says, "Tasted like something meant for someone richer." Then she licks her finger and smiles. Before bed, you look out at the village from your doorway. The green is quiet now, the puppet show packed up, the ale cask empty. A dog barks somewhere. The air smells clean after the rain, and for the first time in days your lungs don't feel coated in dust. Holy days are rare, real rest even rarer. But today had flickers of it. Laughter, bread, ale, stories, a bit of dancing, a small slice of a different life, wrapped in prayer and soaked in rain. And in a world where your hours are usually bought and sold, a day you don't owe to anyone else is more than rest. It's a small rebellion with music. You hear the rumour before the rooster even starts screaming. Word spreads like fire through dry straw. Someone in the next village bought their freedom. Bought it. Just paid the fine, signed the writ, and walked out a free man. You sit on your straw-stuffed mattress, still groggy and not entirely sure you didn't dream it. But then your wife stumbles in from stoking the fire and says, "Did you hear about Thomas of Bellwood? Free now. Walked to market yesterday with his head held so high I thought he'd float away." You blink. Thomas? The thatcher with the limp and the angry chickens? He was a serf. Poor, grimy, unremarkable. Now he's free. The idea lodges in your chest like a splinter. You chew on it all through breakfast, poking your bread with a frown and barely tasting the thin onion broth. Freedom. Real freedom. Not a day off. Not the reeve forgetting to check your tally sheet. Not a wink from the priest when you skip mass. But the kind of freedom you've only ever heard about in stories, or from the lips of bitter old men who claim things used to be different. After chores, feeding the pigs, mending the chicken coop door, fetching water from the sullen, always crooked well, you find yourself drifting toward the edge of the village, where the old folk gather to pass time and complain about knees. You're hoping someone there knows more. Turns out they do. According to Agnes, who knows everything whether she was there or not, Thomas had been secretly hoarding coin. Not just a few pennies tucked into a cloth bag under his bed, but real money. Enough to pay the fine. Enough to buy his charter of manumission, the official writ from the manor lord that states he's no longer bound to the land. The catch? It cost more than you've seen in 10 years. He sold his cow, 2 pigs, gave up his right to a strip of land and borrowed from a merchant in town. And now, he's gone, lives in Stamford, works as a tanner, apparently smells terrible but walks wherever he pleases. You sit with that information. Just sit. It feels like someone's punched you in the head with an idea. Because here's the thing. Freedom's not just some distant concept now. It has a price. A number. It's not mythical. It's mathematical. The trouble is, that number might as well be a dragon's ransom. You don't even own your own tunic. Every coin you make, every chicken you raise, every sack of barley you harvest gets sucked into the black hole of dues and fees. Saving anything feels impossible, like trying to catch rain with a sieve. Still, the seed is planted. As the day goes on, you start seeing everything differently. The fields, chains, the mill, a toll booth, the Reeves ledger, a prison map. You go about your work, pulling weeds, gathering eggs, checking for rot in the root cellar. But your mind keeps drifting. What if you could do it too? Sell the pig, find a buyer for your daughter's embroidery, get the priest to speak well of you to the Lord. Maybe even write your name on a document that says you belong to no one. Then reality kicks you in the shin. You can't read. You don't know how many coins it takes. You've never been to Stamford. You've never even been more than 6 miles from your own front door. The last time you tried, The reeve caught you and fined you for wandering without purpose. It's a ridiculous phrase. No one ever wanders with purpose unless they're chasing something on fire. Later that evening you bring it up with your wife, not directly, just a casual, "Did you hear about Thomas over stew?" She nods slowly, chewing her bread. Then she looks at you for a long moment and says, "He left behind his sister and his mother. They're still tied to the manor. He didn't buy freedom for them." And there it is, the quiet, hard truth. Even if you did manage it, even if you sold everything and scraped together enough to buy your own way out, what about the rest of them? Your wife, your children, your neighbours. Do you just leave them all behind to carry the weight without you? It's not that simple. Nothing is. That night, as the house quiets and the fire dies low, you lie awake listening to the wind scrape the shutters. You think about what it would be like to walk into a town and not have to bow to anyone, to choose where you sleep, to take a job and keep the wages, to own something, anything that no one could take from you. There's a debate among the villagers, quiet and careful, about whether buying freedom is worth it. Some say yes. Life in town might be hard, but it's yours. Others say freedom's a lie, that the moment you escape the Lord you're owned by a guild, a landlord or the church. They say serfs at least know where their next meal comes from, even if it's barley again. But no one can deny it. The idea of freedom changes you, even just hearing about it. It lives in your brain now, whispering when the Lord's steward isn't looking. It crouches behind your eyes when the reeve finds you for missing a morning. It rides beside you in the field, on the back of your worn-out shovel. The fringe tale you overhear later in the week only stokes the fire further. Someone says there's a group of free peasants near Norwich who've formed a fellowship, a little commune of former serfs who bought or fled their way out. They live together, share work, protect one another. It sounds absurd. Sounds like something made up by drunk shepherds, but the idea sticks. The next morning you find yourself measuring things differently. That fence post? Worth a few coppers? That extra row of beans? Could be bartered. The embroidery your daughter stitched with clumsy but sweet care might fetch a coin or two at market if you're lucky. For the first time in years your thoughts stretch beyond the manor. You're still a serf, still tied, still taxed and tracked and timed. But now you know there's a door, a very expensive, very risky, possibly imaginary door. Still, it's there, and you can't unsee it. You wake up sore, but it's not the usual kind. This ache is personal. It's revenge for generations of bad posture, long hours, and your family's proud tradition of being the manor's designated dung pit diggers. Your back twinges the moment you try to stand, and your knees seem to be reenacting a siege. You groan, roll over, and find your youngest child fast asleep on your arm, drooling contentedly. That part, at least, is sweet. The rest? Not so much. Today's one of those days that makes you question your bloodline. You're not harvesting barley or helping patch the road. Today, you're doing the job your father did, and his father before him. You're cleaning out the latrine pits behind the Manor grain store. You like to think there's a special place in history for families like yours, unacknowledged, underappreciated, but absolutely essential. It's not glamorous. No one writes songs about the noble dung haulers of East Wicking-on-Marsh. But without people like you, everyone else would be ankle-deep in their own sins, literally. You grab your tools, a battered wooden shovel, a pail with one handle, and a piece of old cloth to tie around your nose. It doesn't help much. The smell cuts through like a sword through soggy bread. As you walk to the pit, the wind shifts and carries the full bouquet of last week's stew and yesterday's panic down your way. Of course, the manor's toilets aren't toilets in the modern sense. They're just holes, deep, dark, and full of regrets. Your job? Dig it out. Spread the night soil in a field far enough from the village so people can still pretend food grows by magic. It's a grotesque dance of logistics. Where to carry it, when to apply it, how to not slip and fall into it. You'd laugh, but you're too busy gagging. Other villagers give you a wide berth today. They don't say anything. They just nod grimly and look away. Everyone knows it's your turn. No one envies it. But they're glad it's not them. You can almost feel the better-you-than-me energy radiating off your neighbours as you pass. You reach the pits and set to work. The smell is so strong it has a personality, vile, aggressive, and just a bit smug. You mutter curses under your breath and start scooping, moving slowly, carefully, with the grim precision of someone who has absolutely no margin for error. One misstep and you become a cautionary tale. It's during this delicate operation that Henry, the blacksmith's apprentice, wanders over to chat. He keeps a generous distance, arms folded and face half covered. "You ever think," he says thoughtfully, "that some poor soul's entire legacy is going to be shoveling this for the next 100 years? You glance up. "Yeah, that soul's me." He laughs, then asks, "Why don't you try getting out of it? You've got decent arms. You could join the levy, go fight in France, probably only die a little." You wipe your forehead with your sleeve and say, "Because I like my arms attached. Plus, fighting in France sounds like trading one pit for another, except the one over there is full of arrows. It's not just the job that's disgusting, it's the fact that you didn't choose it. You inherited it, like a family curse. Your father did this work for years until his joints refused to bend anymore. Even then, he trained you. Told you which pits drained fastest, which shovels lasted longer, how to angle your shoulders to avoid splashback. Real pearls of wisdom. And now it's yours, and one day it might be your son's." That thought hits harder than the smell. You pause and sit on a stone near the pit, chewing on a bit of dried apple and breathing through your mouth. There's no escaping the stink. It's clung to your skin like a second soul, but at least you can pretend it's not actively crawling into your nostrils. A breeze kicks up and the air turns just bearable. You look around and realise you've walked these same paths for years. Same tools, same tasks, same routine. And it's not just you, it's the carpenter's son, already apprenticed at 10, the reeve's nephew, already scribbling in the manor books, even the priest's helper, young and wide-eyed, already parroting sermons about suffering with a slightly unnerving grin. Jobs don't just get done in the village, they get passed down, like tunics and soup bowls and grudges. You're not really allowed to want anything else. Wanting something else gets you labelled as difficult, or disloyal, or dangerous. There's a fringe tale that floats around the village fires sometimes, about a serf's son who ran away, disguised himself as a monk and became a scholar in Paris, studied Latin, copied books, even advised a bishop. They say he left behind a note that said, "I got tired of digging holes." You want to believe it's true, not because you plan to do the same, but because it would mean that sometimes the cycle doesn't repeat. After a while, you finish the job. You bury the last of the night's soil in the outer field, cover it with straw, and mutter a short prayer for anyone who eats from this patch come harvest. You rinse your hands in the stream, though the smell will stay for days. You scrape your boots on the stones. You even burn a piece of old cloth to try and erase the evidence. It doesn't help. Back home, your wife doesn't say anything when you walk in, reeking like the underside of the world. She just gestures to the back corner where a bucket of lavender water waits. You strip off your tunic and scrub yourself like the guilt itself is in your pores. The water turns cloudy in seconds. Dinner is quiet. The children eat quickly, keeping a careful distance. Your wife serves you last, after the worst of the smells faded. She hands you a bowl of turnip mash with extra salt. A peace offering, maybe. Later in bed, you stare at the ceiling and try not to think about anything. But your thoughts creep in anyway. Not about Thomas the free man or the friar with stories or the taxes or even the war in France. You're thinking about your son. How he helped you carry tools today. How he tried to be brave when the smell hit him. How he asked, eyes wide, hopeful, "Do I get to do this one day too?" You didn't answer him then. And now, in the dark, you still don't have an answer that feels right. The wedding is all anyone can talk about, even though nobody really knows if it's a celebration or a punishment dressed in white linen. Margaret the weaver's daughter is getting married to that red-headed boy from the northern fields. Robert, the one with the lazy eye and surprising biceps. You wouldn't call it a love match exactly. More of a practical agreement wrapped in hopeful glances and sheepish smiles. Still, around here that's practically a fairy tale. Weddings in the village are a strange blend of joy, obligation and chaos. They aren't just about two people. They're a community event, a public notice, a logistical operation, and, depending on the family's luck, a license for brief, glorious indulgence. The Lord has approved it, of course. That part comes first. You can't just go marrying whoever you fancy without permission. Serfs don't belong to themselves, so marriage between two manors, or even two strips of land owned by the same one, has to be cleared, recorded, and sometimes taxed. Yes, you need to pay to fall in love, or at least to legally stay in love without consequences. You remember when you were married, the formality of standing outside the manor hall, waiting for the steward to acknowledge you, the sheep you had to offer as a merchant, a marriage fine, so that your wife could leave her father's cottage and move in with you. The sheep died 2 weeks later, by the way, tripped over its own leg and drowned in a puddle. Bad omen, maybe, but here you are. Preparations for Margaret and Robert's wedding start before the roosters even considered waking up. Everyone's expected to help. Weddings are rare and expensive, and unless you're extremely lucky or exceptionally fertile, most people only attend 1 or 2 in their lifetime that aren't their own. You're assigned to help set up the trestle tables near the old oak, one of the only places flat enough to pretend it's a party ground. The tables are wobbly, legs tied together with fraying rope, and the benches have been scavenged from several cottages. There's already a line of children testing each one with the destructive glee of small gremlins. You wave them off with a threat that sounds more dramatic than you can back up. The bride's family provides ale, the groom's family provides meat, rabbit and miraculously a goose. The ale is weak, as always, and the goose is more bone than bird, but it's still the most luxury you've seen on a table in months. Bread is borrowed, baked in batches across the village over the last few days. The miller's wife even tossed in a jar of salted plums, and everyone stares at it like it might burst into song. The ceremony itself is quick. A simple blessing from Father Amon beneath the oak tree, hands tied with a strip of wool, rings exchanged, a carved bone circle and a copper band, rescued from someone's late uncle. Then it's over, they're married, and now comes the part everyone's really here for, the feast and the folly. The ale starts flowing, and so does the laughter. Someone brings out a flute that sounds like a duck in distress. Another man drums on a barrel with a spoon. It's technically music, though probably not by any noble standard. The dancing begins, stiff at first, then looser as the ale kicks in. You get dragged into it by Agnes, because she always does, and you trip over your own feet twice before finding a rhythm that only occasionally resembles walking. The children chase each other around the table, smacking each other with wildflower crowns and bits of old ribbon. Your own youngest daughter has tied 2 flowers to her hair and insists she's now the Queen of Spring, even though it's October. No one corrects her. Let her rule. As the night deepens, so does the mischief. Someone tries to walk across the trestle table like it's a bridge. They make it halfway before falling into the goosebones. Laughter erupts. Bread gets thrown. Someone catches it in their mouth and is declared the village hero, at least for the next 5 minutes. You find yourself next to Robert's uncle, a man with suspiciously clean boots and a suspiciously dirty laugh. He tells you that in his youth he ran away for 3 whole weeks to join a travelling band of minstrels. Said he played the tambourine and fell in love twice. You ask why he came back. He just shrugs and says, "Winter." Later in the evening, the bride and groom are led away to a tiny, hastily cleaned-out storage hut, where they'll spend their first night. A handful of children try to follow them giggling, but are herded back by older siblings. You remember your own wedding night. Not romantic, exactly. There were rats, and the roof leaked, but you were both too tired to care. It was yours, and that was enough. Once the couple's gone, the party continues, as parties always do when no one wants to admit it's over. People dance badly, sing loudly, and eventually collapse into soft heaps of laughter and ale breath. You sit with your wife under the tree, her hand resting on your knee, both of you watching the stars blink into existence through the branches. "I hope they're happy," she says quietly. You nod. They have to be. That's the rule. There's a moment of stillness, you breathe it in, but even on a wedding day the cracks are there. You overhear someone grumbling that the steward added an extra tithe to approve the marriage. Someone else whispers that the bride's older brother wanted to marry a girl from another manor but was denied. Not enough sheep, they said. Another man jokes that the real marriage is between the Lord and your labour. Still, no one says these things too loud, not tonight. Eventually you walk your family home, arms full of sleepy children, your feet sore from dancing and your throat dry from talking. The house smells like old smoke and damp wool, familiar and worn like a second skin. Lying in bed, you can still hear the distant hum of the flute, the low thump of laughter fading into the night. Tomorrow, you'll return to the fields, the reeve will scold someone for being late, and the Lord will find a new reason to remind you that joy is borrowed, not owned. But tonight, just for this small window, the village belonged to itself. No taxes, no fines, no permission slips. Just bread, ale, laughter, and 2 young fools daring to believe they could choose something for themselves. You don't think much about clothes, mostly because you don't have many. Technically, you have a wardrobe, if you define wardrobe as 1 tunic, one undertunic, a belt, and some footwear that could politely be described as hope held together by string. Everything you own fits into a single wooden chest no bigger than a goat, and half of it smells like goat too. There's not a lot of variety when your closet is basically today's shirt or no shirt at all. This morning you wake to find your tunic ripped right under the arm. It must have given out during the dancing last night. Maybe when you tried to show your daughter that your back can bend if properly bribed with ale. Or maybe it just got tired of holding itself together after too many years of being worn, washed and patched with thread and blind optimism. You sigh, hold it up to the light and give it a sniff. It smells like sweat, smoke and onions. In other words, the village's default scent. Your wife eyes the tear and immediately sets to mending it with a piece of thread she saved from unravelling some other unfortunate garment. She's good with a needle, better than she lets on, and over the years she's stitched that tunic into a map of your life. Every patch tells a story. The burn mark from when you leaned too close to the hearth, the frayed hem from chasing the neighbour's sheep through brambles, the faded wine stain from that one feast where the reeve accidentally complimented your barley. As she works, your daughter pipes up from the corner where she's fashioning a crown out of chicken feathers and twine. Why don't we just get a new one? You and your wife both snort. One of those involuntary, weary laughs that only come from poverty's wellspring. A new tunic, like it's something you can pick up at the next market in exchange for a smile and a kind word. New clothes are reserved for the manor, the priest, or the rare rich tradesman who passes through wearing dyed wool and soft leather shoes that never touch mud. Dye, by the way, is pure luxury. Your tunic is the colour of dirt, not by design, but because everything eventually becomes the colour of dirt when you're poor and surrounded by mud half the year. Bright clothing marks you out as either a traveller or someone so important they don't have to carry anything. You, on the other hand, could carry your entire life on your back, and your shirt would still sag from the weight. When it comes to fabric, wool is king. It's scratchy, hot in the summer, cold in the winter, and somehow still the best option available. Linen is rare and saved for undergarments, if you're lucky. Silk? That's a fantasy word. A whisper passed down in church stories and bishop gossip. You used to own a cloak. It wasn't fancy, more like a rectangle with a hood, but it kept the wind off your chest. Then one winter, the cow got sick and needed warmth more than you did, so now the cow wears the cloak and you wear layers of bitterness. By mid-morning, your wife hands the tunic back to you with a satisfied grunt. The patch is neat, if slightly mismatched. You slip it on and belt it with your rope-thin sash, and just like that, you're presentable again. Not impressive, just not entirely indecent. That's the line you aim for. Shoes are next. You only wear them when absolutely necessary. They're more leather than sole at this point, and one toe peeks out like it's testing the weather. Most of the time, you go barefoot. You've built up calluses thick enough to stop a nail and questionable enough to spark theological debate. You head out to the green where others are already gathered for the day's work. As usual, you check what everyone's wearing. Not out of fashion envy, but survival habit. Clothes say a lot. A new stitch means someone's been saving thread. A cleaner hem might mean they borrowed someone's better tunic for the day. You spot old Walter wearing what appears to be his daughter's shift under a man's cloak. He's either gone senile or extremely confident. Clothing theft is rare, but it happens. One winter, someone stole Agnes's wool scarf. She nearly burned the village down with her rage. Later it was found wrapped around a lamb, which just added to the mystery. To this day, no one's confessed, but the lamb still gets suspicious looks. During break, you share a crust of bread with Henry and Matthew, sitting near the edge of the field. Henry's fiddling with a tear in his sleeve, muttering about buying a new one this year. You look at him sideways. With what? Imaginary chickens? He shrugs. Might get lucky at market. Might win a bet. Everyone always talks about market like it's a golden opportunity, but unless you've got something worth selling, eggs, herbs, a decent carving, it's mostly just a place to look at things you can't afford and get bumped by strangers who smell worse than you. Still, you do remember one glorious day at market years ago when you traded a carved wooden whistle for a length of dyed cloth. Deep blue, like the sky after rain. Your wife turned it into a head wrap and wore it to every feast until it faded back to mud brown. You still remember how she glowed that day. Just for a moment you didn't look like villagers. You looked like royalty with holes in your shoes. By the end of the day you're filthy again. Your patched tunic is soaked with sweat and your legs are streaked with mud. You strip it off at home and hang it by the hearth, already stiff with grime. Your wife looks it over and says, "Might last another season." You nod. Maybe, if the seams hold, if the fire doesn't spark, if you don't catch it on the fence post again like last time. There's a debate that sometimes crops up during long winter nights, when everyone's huddled around the fire pretending not to be cold. Would you rather have good shoes or a second shirt? It's more than idle chatter. It's philosophy dressed as small talk. You always say shoes. Your wife says shirt. Your son, bless him, says meat, which earns him a blanket and a pat on the head. Later, after dinner, you sit with your daughter as she stitches a small patch onto a cloth doll she's made from scraps of your old tunic. You watch her work, tongue sticking out in concentration, fingers nimble. She's already better at sewing than you are. You want to tell her that maybe she could take that skill and build something out of it, sew for trade, or maybe even for the manor. Maybe even for a merchant's household if life's feeling generous. But instead you just say, "That's a fine patch," and she beams like you've given her a crown. Because here, in this little world of scraps and threadbare dreams, a compliment is worth its weight in silver, and a single shirt holds more stories than any book you'll ever read. The reeve calls court today, and the whole village groans like it's just been asked to eat its own shoes. You can't avoid it. Nobody can. Manor court is one of those things built into your life like the seasons or rats in the grain store. Predictable, irritating, and always slightly worse than you remember. It's held in the same spot every time, just outside the manor hall, beneath the creaky timber awning that leaks when it rains and echoes when people cry. You don't even have to be in trouble to be summoned. Sometimes you're just a witness. Sometimes you're part of a jury made up of your equally clueless neighbours, and sometimes you're just there to learn from the proceedings, which is noble-sounding code for stand quietly while your friends get fined for things you probably did last week. Today, your name's on the list. You sigh, rinse your face in the trough and pull on your best tunic. Well, the cleanest dirty one, which is saying something. Your wife straightens your collar like you're about to receive a knighthood and mutters, "Don't let them trick you into agreeing to something dumb." Solid advice? She's not coming, of course. The law doesn't like women speaking during court unless they're confessing, apologising, or being accused of something scandalous like wearing shoes too nice for a serf. By the time you arrive, the crowd's already gathered. Everyone's murmuring, adjusting their hoods, avoiding eye contact with the steward, who stands near the Lord's chair with a little scroll and a smug look that suggests he enjoys his job way too much. The Lord himself won't be here. He rarely is. These days he's off hunting in the forest, or harassing wine merchants for better vintage. The steward handles the village while he's away, which means today's justice will be swift, bureaucratic, and mostly random. The reeve starts with the usual, calling names, checking attendance, glaring at anyone who looks like they might sneeze during a judgment. The first case is classic. Walter's pig got into the barley again. Walter swears it wasn't his pig, but everyone knows it was. The animal has a limp, a missing ear, and a penchant for chaos. The fine is a bushel of grain or 3 days of labour. Walter chooses labour, probably because the pig already ate his grain. Next up is Joan, accused of gathering wood from the forbidden part of the forest. She protests that it was windfall and not chopped, but the steward narrows his eyes like she's just confessed to witchcraft. She's fined a chicken, payable immediately. Her daughter sighs loudly and walks off to go catch the unlucky bird. Your case is called next. You step forward, heart thumping, hands damp. You're being charged with failure to maintain boundary markers between allotted strips, which sounds more serious than it is. Your neighbour, Edmund, claims your plough strayed over his plot by a hand's width last week. A hand. That's the space between your thumb and pinky. You both worked that field the same day. You both saw the marker, a sad little stick wrapped in twine, half buried in mud and despair. But now it's turned into a legal matter. You try to explain, calmly, respectfully. The steward listens with the exact face a cat gives a bird before it pounces. Then he turns to Edmund, who gives a dramatic retelling involving deliberate deception and theft of soil. You're fined 2 pence or 1 day's labour on the manor's domain. You don't even argue. You just nod and accept the labour. Not because you agree, but because arguing costs more than it saves. Everyone knows that. This isn't about right and wrong. This is about control. The manor court isn't here to resolve problems. It's here to remind you who owns the bench, the gavel, and your boots. The rest of the session is a carousel of petty grievances and unspoken grudges. Someone accused of using the mill without paying, a youth caught stealing bread, a woman scolded for brewing ale too strong. She sold it anyway, accidentally, she claimed. Each case ends the same: a fine, a labour sentence, or in one particularly dramatic moment, public shame. That last one involves Matthew, the carpenter's nephew, who apparently got drunk and mooned the steward's horse. He's sentenced to a week of cleaning chamber pots and must apologise formally in front of the entire court, including the horse. You can't help but smile. After the cases are done, the steward reads a new list of updated dues, slightly higher tithes this quarter, and a minor adjustment to the amount of grain owed during harvest. The crowd murmurs, and a few people shift their weight like they're preparing to say something. No one does. Saying something is dangerous. As you walk home, you pass Joan carrying her fine chicken, still clucking indignantly in her arms. She gives you a look that says, "Same dung, different day," and you nod in agreement. You find your wife in the garden, pulling weeds with the expression of someone imagining they're yanking out the steward's hair by the root. You tell her about your fine. She snorts. Edmund's plot barely grows nettles. He should be grateful your plough touched it. She hands you a basket and puts you to work immediately. No time to wallow. That evening, as you sit by the fire eating thin stew and chewing stale bread, the children ask about court. Your son wants to know what public shame means. Your daughter asks if someone really stole flour by stuffing it in their hat. You laugh, but it's hollow. Because here's the thing. The court's not just a place. It's a feeling. It lives in your bones. It's the weight behind every cautious decision. The whisper in your ear reminding you not to step out of line. It's the reason people stay silent when the steward raises taxes or when the Reeves cousin forgets to record your labour credit. There's a quiet debate among the older villagers, usually whispered after dark when the ale's been flowing. Did justice used to mean something? Was there a time when the court protected people instead of policing them? Some say yes. Others say it's always been this way, just with nicer words and less paperwork. You don't know the answer. All you know is that you did your day's work, paid your fine, and lived to grumble about it. Which, in this world, counts as a small, ragged victory. The seasons aren't just background scenery in your life. They're the director, the cast, the crew, and the stage manager all rolled into one demanding, moody force of nature. If you ever want to understand a serf's world, don't ask them about politics or kings or the church. Ask them what season it is. You'll get a better idea of their mood, their aches, their dinner, and how likely they are to cry into a bucket of barley before sunset. Today, the wind has teeth. Not winter's full bite, but a definite nip to the air. The leaves are starting to blush around the edges, and that means two things. Your joints are about to complain louder than usual, and it's almost harvest time, which means everything is about to accelerate like someone lit a fire under the soil. The seasons rule your existence like four unpredictable monarchs. Spring is the optimist, hopeful, wet, muddy, bursting with the illusion that this year, maybe, just maybe, things will grow right. Summer is the tyrant, hot, relentless, choking you with dust and sweat while reminding you that if you don't work now, you'll starve later. Autumn is the collector, sickle in hand, measuring your work, judging your output. And winter is the executioner, cold, dark, indifferent. A long, slow silence punctuated by coughing fits and the sound of roofs leaking. Right now, you're in the waning days of summer. You can feel it. The mornings are darker, the birds quieter. The fields have that heavy golden look, the one that says, "I'm almost ready." Bring your baskets and your sawbacks. You've been preparing for weeks, sharpening tools, repairing sacks, praying for dry weather, because once the harvest starts, there's no stopping. It doesn't matter if your leg cramps, your head spins, or your child's got a fever. If the grain is ready, you get to work or you go hungry later. That's the deal, no negotiation. Your own plot is small, but your first duty is to the Lord's domain, the prime land he keeps for himself, the best soil, the best sun, the best yield. You and the other serfs will harvest it before you're even allowed to touch your own. Because fairness is for saints and imaginary people, not for those bound to the land. This morning, the reeve blows his horn, a battered thing that sounds like a dying goat, and the village gathers at the edge of the big field. Sickle blades glint in the low sun. You nod to your neighbours, roll your sleeves and start cutting. The motion is mindless, hypnotic. Bend, swing, gather. Over and over. The grain scratches your arms, the sweat runs into your eyes. Your fingers cramp by midday, but you keep going. The rhythm keeps you sane. In some strange way, it feels almost peaceful. Like the work is so consuming it squeezes out every other thought. Taxes, fines, rumours, pain. All of it disappears behind the steady swish of steel through stalks. Still, the aches creep in. By late afternoon your legs feel like wet wood and your shoulders burn. You sit for a moment on a stone, sharing a cup of weak ale with Matthew, who's too tired to insult anyone. That's how you know it's serious. "Think it'll be a good yield?" he asks, wiping his brow. You glance out at the field, golden, bowed, nearly shimmering in the breeze. "Looks like it," he grunts. "Hope the rats think otherwise." Rats. Always the wild card. Every year they come, chewing through your stores like tiny furry tax collectors. Last year you lost half your barley to them, and spent winter chewing on regret and turnips. After the break you return to the field. The sun dips lower, the sky stretches orange and pink. The grain falls in neat piles waiting to be bundled and carted. You keep going, pushing through the pain. There's no rest until the steward says so. The next few days are a blur. Up before dawn, working till after sunset, eating in the field, sleeping like you've been clubbed over the head, and just when you think your body can't possibly keep moving, it does, because it has to. And then finally it's your turn. The Lord's grain is in. His barns are full. His steward has done his smug little nod of approval. Now, you get to harvest your plot. It's smaller, coarser. The grain grows unevenly, some stalks bent or shriveled. But it's yours. The moment your sickle slices into your own field, something in you lifts. You hum a little tune. Your wife joins you, basket in hand. Your eldest son works beside you, grinning when you race him to finish a row. It's still back-breaking, sweaty, exhausting work, but the burden is lighter when it's feeding your own. Your wife finds a fat beetle crawling on a stalk and flicks it away with a muttered curse. She catches you smiling and says, "Don't get romantic about it. We're still going to be short on oats." You laugh. She's probably right, but for now, this small moment, harvesting your own food, is enough. At night the village is quieter. People don't have energy for gossip or storytelling. Everyone's too tired. You sit by the fire, sipping weak broth, and listen to your wife tell the children how the moon affects the harvest. She says if it's full during threshing, the grain will keep better. She says her mother taught her that. You nod like you believe it. Maybe you do. There's a debate that comes up now and then. Is it better to have a long, slow harvest with little yield, or a fast, rich one followed by higher taxes? Some argue the second gets it over with faster. Others say the first is safer, you don't get noticed as much. You sit quietly during these debates. You know the truth. Either way you'll be working till your fingers bleed, and the only difference is how polite the steward is while taking your best bundles. One of your neighbours, a wiry old man named Tobe, claims he once delayed the Lord's harvest by telling him the grain was not yet spiritually ripe. The steward apparently didn't buy it. Tobe spent a week hauling manure in penance. Still, you admire the creativity. By the end of harvest, your back has fully rebelled, your arms are permanently stuck in carry sack position, and your boots are so caked in mud they've doubled in weight. But your storage shed is full, or at least full enough. Barley, rye, a few carrots, some beans, a small miracle of onions, and even a handful of wrinkled apples from the Manor orchard that definitely fell naturally and were not taken after dark. You're tired, yes, but you made it. And as you lie down that night, muscles twitching, your wife snoring softly beside you, you feel something rare settle over your chest. Pride. Not the loud kind. The quiet, exhausted, we didn't starve yet kind. The kind you don't say out loud because the gods might hear and send a thunderstorm out of spite. The seasons will change again. Winter will come with its cold teeth and hollow bellies. But for now you've brought in the harvest, and no one can take that from you. Not yet. There's a hush over the village that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like fear with a hand over its mouth. It's in the way people glance sideways instead of speaking. It's in the way the chickens have been let out later, and the children told not to stray too far. You notice it first at the well, where you usually hear gossip, laughter, or at least someone cursing their ox. Today, nothing but the rope creaking over the pulley and a faint cough from somewhere behind the hedgerow. That cough. That's what started it. A sound that wouldn't mean much on any other day, but now it lingers, and it's spreading. You've heard rumours before. Whispers pass down the market line, the priest's quiet warnings during his sermons, travellers who pass through with fearful eyes, and too much distance between them and the rest of the world. And now the rumours have found you. The plague is back. Or maybe it never left. This time it's come from the port towns, they say. A ship full of wool and death. Rats hiding in the hold, fleas hiding on the rats, and sickness hiding in the fleas. It all sounds like a bad story children tell each other to avoid doing chores. But now you're hearing the same version from 4 different mouths, and the fear behind the words is very, very real. The first person to die is Margaret's aunt. She's old, true, and already had a limp and a nasty cough. But the way she went, fast, choking, black blotches on her skin, it doesn't feel like old age. Father Eamon says it's a punishment, a cleansing fire for the village's sins. Margaret says her aunt never even missed a holy day. You don't say anything, because you're too busy wondering whether it's already in your house, hidden in the corners like mould, waiting. Within days, another death, then 2, then 5. You're not a doctor. Those belong in castles and monasteries, and even they barely know more than the average cow. But you can recognise a pattern. The fever starts fast, burns like hell, and then the swelling comes. Underarms, groin, neck, like angry fruit growing under the skin. Sometimes the tongue turns black, sometimes it's the fingertips, sometimes it's everything. The victims go quiet at the end. There's no screaming, just a sort of breathless surrender. People begin to change. Not just the sick, but everyone. You see it in their eyes. They stop talking, stop gathering, stop touching. The reeve no longer patrols the green. The steward hasn't been seen in 3 days. Father Eamon has taken to burning incense non-stop in the church, muttering prayers so fast they sound like one long holy wheeze. Your wife starts boiling water constantly. She hangs herbs above the door, mostly rosemary and garlic, and rubs vinegar on the shutters. You do the same, not because you believe it works, but because she believes it might. And belief is all you've got right now. You keep the children indoors, even when the sun is out, even when the air smells sweet and innocent. You nail the back door shut. You bury your waist deeper than ever before. You sleep with a knife by the bed, not for the plague, but in case fear makes someone do something stupid. One night, you hear wailing. Not the sad, soft kind. The open-throated animal kind. A woman's voice, raw and breaking. You creep outside and see a man stumbling across the green, carrying something in his arms. It's his daughter. She's small and limp and so still that even from a distance you know. No one helps him. Not because they're cruel, but because they're terrified. Death is not just personal now, it's contagious. The burial pit is dug away from the village, in the old fallow field. No one wants to talk about how fast it's filling. The men take turns digging, wrapped in cloth soaked in vinegar, faces hidden like monks or thieves. The priest tries to keep up with prayers, but even he's starting to lose his voice. There aren't enough candles to keep up with the dead. You catch a glimpse of the ledger the steward left behind. Someone finds it, abandoned in his house, names scratched out, whole families. It doesn't look like a record anymore, it looks like a surrender. Then it hits your family. Your middle child, your quiet one, wakes with a fever. Not a high one at first, but enough. You and your wife look at each other, and there's nothing left to say. You've prepared for this. You built walls in your mind, tried to stay calm, tried to believe it might miss you, but now it's here, in your house, on your straw mattress, inside your child. You do what you can, cool cloths, prayer. Your wife burns more herbs, smears garlic on the doorframe like it can ward off the wind. You hold your child's hand as it goes hot, then hotter, then too hot to bear. They sleep in fits, mumbling strange things, sometimes calling out for people who are long gone. You stop eating. You don't speak unless it's to pray or comfort. You barely sleep. The days smear together like soot on stone. And then, one morning, the fever breaks. Your child opens their eyes. Their skin is pale, their lips dry, but the swelling never came. They eat a little porridge, then ask for more. You and your wife take turns crying in the back room where they can't hear you. That day you go outside and see the sun differently. The air smells like life again. Others weren't so lucky. Whole families are gone. Houses stand empty, silent. Doorways sealed with branches. The church bell tolls constantly now. So often it feels like part of the air. But your family is still standing. You don't know why. You don't pretend to understand it. But you're here. There's debate now about what caused it. Some blame the Jews in the towns. Others say it was God punishing the wicked. Some say it's the stars or bad air or frogs. One man claims he saw it crawl into the village as a shadow with teeth. You say nothing. What could you possibly say that matters? The plague doesn't care what you believe. It doesn't argue or negotiate, it just takes. And when it leaves, if it leaves, it doesn't apologize. You've survived, for now. But the world feels different. The ground feels uncertain beneath your feet. You see ghosts in your neighbor's eyes. Laughter feels forced. Food tastes like guilt. You're still a serf, still tied to the land. But part of you wonders if the land itself is poisoned. Not by death, but by what it forced you to become in order to survive it. The man on the horse isn't from around here. That much is obvious. His boots are polished, his cloak is dry despite the mist, and his face wears the expression of someone who's never had to dig a latrine or wash with water from a cattle trough. He arrives without warning, without greetings, and without even pretending to care that your village just clawed its way through a plague winter. He plants himself in the centre of the green like a tree in the wrong season, unrolling a scroll and reading it with the bored authority of a man who's delivered the same bad news 10 times already this week. By order of His Majesty the King, he begins, a poll tax shall be levied on every subject above the age of 15, regardless of station or means. Payment is due within 3 weeks. The words fall heavy. Poll tax. 2 words that never come with good news. Everyone glances at one another, faces tight, jaws clenched, eyes darting like cornered animals. The steward, who has finally re-emerged after hiding through the worst of the plague, hovers behind the tax collector like a loyal shadow, pretending he hasn't spent the last month eating from full stores while half the village starved. You feel it before anyone speaks. The weight, the pressure, the insult. This isn't just another tax on your harvest or your pigs or your right to breathe manor air. This one's personal. A head tax. Every soul costs coin now. It doesn't matter that your tools are broken, your family's been coughing since Candlemas, or your food stores are emptier than the priest promises. If you have a head, you owe. The collector finishes his announcement and rides off with the arrogance of a man who's never been hungry. The steward stays behind, setting up a table with quills, ink and a lockbox. It's all very official, very polished, and utterly disconnected from reality. Back at your cottage, your wife is furious in that quiet, efficient way she's perfected over the years. She slams pots louder than usual, mends socks with aggressive needle jabs, and mutters things under her breath that might get her excommunicated if said in church. You try to calm her, but she's right. The tax is madness. Everyone knows it. The village hasn't recovered. The plague left empty homes and half-dug graves. You've only just begun planting again, and now the crown demands coin that doesn't exist. By evening, the green buzzes with angry whispers. People gather in small, tight circles, speaking in lowered voices, casting glances toward the manor. There's talk of resistance, not the loud, torch-wielding kind, but something quieter. A refusal, a delay. Maybe if no one pays, the steward will back off. Maybe the king will forget this corner of the kingdom. Maybe pigs will fly. You attend a meeting that night in the old storehouse, the one that still smells faintly of damp oats and broken promises. The room is full. Faces lit by rush lamps, voices sharp, nerves frayed. Matthew stands on a crate and clears his throat like he's about to lead a prayer. Instead, he says, "We can't pay it, so we won't." It's bold. Bolder than anything you've heard in a while. "There's nothing to give," he continues. "If we pay, we starve. If we don't, they punish us. But at least if we don't, we do it together." It's not a speech for the ages, but it's enough. Heads nod, teeth clench. Someone mutters, "I'd rather be flogged than robbed again." Another says, "Let the steward try to take what I haven't got." You leave that night feeling something strange, something dangerous. Hope. Not the kind you feel when the crops bloom early or the ale ferment's just right. This is sharper, heavier, the kind of a hope that wants to do something. The next day you walk past the tax table without stopping. So does everyone else. The steward sits there, tapping his ink-stained fingers, glaring at villagers as they pass. By noon, he's fuming. By sunset, he's red-faced and muttering to himself. That night the Lord returns. He doesn't usually bother with village matters, but this one's different. Money is involved. Orders from the king. Failure to collect is failure to obey. So he rides in with his guards, demands explanations, and is told, politely through clenched teeth, that no one has paid. Not a single coin. He's not amused. The next morning the punishments begin. The first to be made an example is Thomas, the cooper. A good man. Quiet, hard-working, recently widowed. He's hauled in front of the manor and fined double for defiance. When he can't pay, they take his tools. His tools. You might as well take a fish's gills. The message is clear. Resist, and we take your livelihood. But here's the thing. Thomas still doesn't pay. He shows up to the green the next day with a borrowed hammer and a borrowed smile and says, "I'll keep working, and they can keep watching me." It spreads. The next day, Agnes pretends to be deaf. Walter claims he's dying. Geoffrey shows up to the table and starts reciting psalms until the steward throws a chair. Small acts. Petty ones. But each refusal is a spark. And sparks, you know, are dangerous when the whole field is dry. You don't pay either. Not because you want to be a hero, but because you simply can't. You have a family to feed, fields to plant, and no extra coins hiding in your tunic. You go about your chores pretending the tax doesn't exist because pretending is safer than shouting. Still, you feel something shifting. People walk straighter, talk louder. There's laughter again. Nervous, bitter, but laughter nonetheless. And every evening more villagers gather in the storehouse, whispering, planning. Not rebellion exactly, not yet, but something's coming. The crown wants coins, the lord wants obedience, but the village wants to be heard, to be seen, to not be treated like walking purses with dirty hands. And you want a world where your child can grow up without fearing the taxman more than the winter. For now, you wait, you work, you watch. But your fists are tighter than before, and the wind, for once, feels like it's blowing your way. You don't plan to join a revolt. Nobody does. Not really. It's not like you wake up one morning, look outside at the frost creeping up the shutters and say, "You know what? Today feels like a good day to rise up against centuries of inherited oppression." It's quieter than that. Slower. Like a pot left too long over a fire until one bubble becomes 2, then 10, then a frothing boil. And by the time the peasants' revolt reaches your ears in 1381, it's already spilled into the countryside like floodwater, looking for something to uproot. The rumours come first, wild and unbelievable. A man named Wat Tyler, an actual person, not just a tavern story, is leading peasants, artisans, even disgruntled townsfolk on a march straight to London. They've stormed manors, burned tax rolls, and made lords flee in their underclothes. Priests are preaching from church steps that all men were created equal. Equal. You hear that word and don't know whether to laugh or hold your breath. You sit around the fire that night, your hands wrapped around a chipped cup of thin ale, and listen as Matthew recounts the latest word. They say the king's men couldn't stop them, that Tyler's got thousands following him. Even some nights he says this with wide eyes, like a child hearing the story of St. George for the first time. But this time, the dragon is real. Your wife looks sceptical, spooning out pottage for the children. "And what happens when they reach the king?" You shrug. "Maybe he'll listen." She gives you a look, the kind that says you've clearly lost your mind. The king doesn't listen. He demands. He taxes. He bleeds us dry. Then he demands more. Still, the idea sticks. A few days later, there's a meeting in the storehouse. Not just gossip, not just grumbling. A real meeting. Word has come from the next village over. They've driven their steward out, burned the tax records, declared themselves free men. Free. You can't stop picturing it. A world where you don't owe labour to the Lord, where you can marry without permission, where your children aren't born into bondage like piglets in a pen. When the question comes, who's going to march with them? The silence is deep. Then someone speaks. Agnes. She's 70 if she's a day, and her knees crack like dry wood when she moves. But she lifts her chin and says, "I'll go. If I don't see justice in this life, I'll haunt it into the next." It's hard to argue with that. So, you agree. You, Matthew, Henry, Joan's eldest, even the miller's shy apprentice who's barely old enough to grow a beard. You all pack what little you can. Bread, dried apples, a hunk of questionable cheese. Your wife doesn't stop you. She just fixes your cloak, presses a sprig of rosemary into your palm and says, "Don't be stupid. Or at least don't be the first one who's stupid." The morning you leave, the village is quiet. No goodbyes, no speeches, just nods, silent prayers. A feeling in the air like the first breath before a storm. You walk for miles, through fields and woods, past other villages where people stand on the roadside, some cheering, some watching with tight lips. The group grows. Men with pitchforks, women with sticks, young boys shouting slogans they barely understand. It doesn't look like an army. It looks like a crowd at harvest time, only angrier. By the time you reach the outskirts of London, the crowd is massive. Fires burn in the distance. Smoke rolls like thunderclouds above the rooftops. Someone says they've stormed the tower. Someone else says the Archbishop is dead. You feel it in your bones. This isn't a protest anymore. It's a reckoning. You pass through towns where manor houses stand empty. Lords fled, servants gone, windows smashed like rotten teeth. In one town, the local reeve was stripped naked, tied to a fence, and pelted with turnips. It's funny, in a dark sort of way. You laugh with the others, but a part of you flinches, because now you know this thing has teeth. In the city, everything is chaos. You hear speeches in the square, loud, fiery ones. Men standing on crates shouting about freedom, justice, God's law. What Tyler speaks, and he sounds like a prophet and a blacksmith rolled into one. He says the king has agreed to end serfdom, that he's signed a charter, that you're free now. The crowd roars. You roar with them. You grip a stranger's arm and shout that your children will never bow to a lord again. And for one glorious moment you believe it. Then Tyler dies. You don't see it happen, but the word spreads fast. He was meeting the king. There were insults, a sword drawn, a slash across the neck. Dead. Just like that. Everything crumbles. The crowd scatters. The promises are retracted. The king rides out with soldiers and a practiced smile saying, "You shall have no leader but me." You don't sleep that night. The camp is tense, quiet. You pack your things before dawn and begin the walk back home. No victory parade, no freedom, just aching feet and the sour taste of betrayal in your mouth. When you return, the steward is back. The manor's guards walk the green again. The court resumes. Fines are higher, whispers are dangerous. But the village is different. You're different. The lord's still lord. The reeve still counts your labour. But they can't unburn the manor in that nearby town. They can't unscare the steward who trembles when he speaks too loud. And they can't unsay what was shouted in the square. You shall be free. Maybe not today, maybe not next year. But the idea's out now, and ideas don't die easy. You never thought much about love growing up. Not because you weren't the sentimental type, but because love in the village was more of a transaction than a tale. A good marriage, for most, meant the pig came with the bride, or that the lad had a cow and all his teeth. Romance was something that might happen later, after the chores, after the babies, after both parties had survived at least 2 winters together without throttling each other. In the meantime, a strong back and a fertile womb were all the poetry you needed. But even so, love did happen, quietly, in hedgerows, in stolen glances at the bakehouse, in the clumsy way a boy might bring a girl the biggest onion he could find, too proud to admit it was his only one. You remember when it hit you, back when you were still sleeping beside your brothers and smelling like pig feed every morning. It was Maud, long braid, quick mouth, hands always smelling like rosemary and barley flour. She once knocked you flat with a bucket for staring too long. You married her 2 years later. Your daughter's just now come of age, and lately you've caught her humming while sweeping the floor, or smoothing her hair a little too often, or sneaking glances at the reeve's new stable boy, the one with the good shoulders and terrible manners. You don't say anything, but you watch. Carefully. You know what's coming. It always starts with songs and shy smiles, and ends with someone crying into soup while you try not to say, "I told you so." Still, there's no stopping it. Young love blooms even in mud. There's an unspoken understanding in the village that people get together when it's time. Not necessarily when they're ready. No one's ever ready. But when the circumstances line up. A girl with a dowry of chickens meets a boy with a roof that doesn't leak, and they're paired up faster than you can say customary labour obligation. The rest, the attraction, the awkward first weeks, the figuring out how to live with someone who steals the blanket every night, that comes later. Or doesn't. Either way, life moves forward. Of course, the manor still has a say. Serfs can't marry without permission. Technically, the lord owns not just your field, but your marital status too. If your daughter wanted to wed someone from another manor, the lord could charge you a fine or deny the match outright. Love needs a ledger in this world. Everything does. Still, there's something charming about the little courtships that spring up like weeds. You remember Matthew carving a comb from bone for his sweetheart, even though his hands were better suited for chopping firewood than fine detail? Or Agnes, back in her youth, sneaking off to the woods with her eventual husband and returning with a wildflower crown and a look that dared anyone to comment. And of course the marriages themselves are memorable. You've attended dozens. Most take place outdoors, under a tree, on the green, by the church if someone's feeling especially pious. The priest mumbles a few words about duty and unity. The couple exchanges something symbolic, a ribbon, a token, a ring if they're lucky, and then everyone eats until the bread runs out. There's dancing, ale, sometimes a goat in a flower wreath, and at least one relative who drinks too much and tries to sing a ballad they don't remember the words to. It's messy, loud, and exactly right. Your own wedding was modest. You had a shirt with only one hole in it, and your wife wore a borrowed shawl that smelled like thyme and soot. You didn't have much, but the fire in your cottage burned warm that night, and her hand in yours felt like something permanent. Over time, love shifts. It stops being about whispers and becomes about survival, about watching each other's backs through sickness and lean harvests, about knowing someone so well you can tell what kind of day they've had by the way they hang their cloak. You and Maud still argue, sometimes spectacularly, but at the end of every night, you still lie back to back, your feet touching beneath the blankets. That's love, at least the durable kind. But not all stories end neatly. Sometimes love goes wrong. Sometimes people are forced into marriages they don't want. A family needs the alliance. A debt must be paid. You've seen the aftermath. Quiet women with eyes like closed shutters, men who drink too much and speak too little. There's no room to fix a bad match when survival eats all your time. Then there's the love that isn't allowed. 2 girls in your village were caught kissing behind the mill house once. The priest called it unnatural, and the steward fined both families for causing scandal. One girl was married off within the month. The other never looked anyone in the eye again. You still think about that sometimes. How a love that caused no harm was punished harder than a man who once stole 3 chickens and blamed it on ghosts. And what about the widowed? Those who loved deeply and then lost. Some remarry out of need. Others never do. Agnes once told you she loved her husband so much that she couldn't bear to replace him. Even if the next one comes with a fat cow and better knees, she joked. Then her face softened. You only get one soul match. If you're lucky, she spat afterward to ward off sentimentality, but you could tell she meant it. There's a debate you've had many times, usually after the 3rd cup of ale around a fire. Is love a luxury or a necessity? Henry says it's for people who can afford to dream. Agnes says it's the only reason people haven't all walked into the sea. You think it's both. It might not keep your belly full, but it keeps your back straight. It makes cold nights warmer. It gives the pain a reason. Tonight your daughter hums again while braiding her hair. You recognise the tune. It's the same one your wife sang when you first met. That old folk song about a lover in the hedgerow, waiting with flowers and foolish hopes. Your wife rolls her eyes but doesn't stop her. You watch them both, heartsick and proud. You know you can't protect her from everything, but you also know she's strong. She'll love like the rest of you did, messily, bravely, imperfectly, and if it breaks her heart, well, there's always ale and onions, because in this life, love isn't always a fairy tale, but sometimes it's enough. You think about it for weeks before you say a word to anyone. The idea keeps scratching at the back of your mind like a mouse behind the wattle walls, persistent and hungry. Run away. Just leave. Take the road at dawn and don't look back. Let the manor rot. Let the reeve keep his ledger and the steward his fines. You weren't born to die in a patch of barley. You weren't carved out of mud just to spend your life feeding lords who've never lifted anything heavier than a wine jug. And people do run. Not often, not loudly, but they do. They vanish in the night, leaving behind cold hearths and unfinished chores. Sometimes they're found, dragged back by the Lord's men, beaten, shackled, heads shaved as punishment. Other times they're just gone. They disappear into the trees, into towns, into cities where no one asks questions as long as you work hard and keep your mouth shut. The law calls you a fugitive if you leave without permission. Not a rebel, not a dreamer, a fugitive. Property gone missing, same as if a cart vanished or a plough walked away on its own legs. You know the risks. You've seen the risks. 2 years ago, a young man from a neighbouring village ran off. He left a note, scribbled poorly, full of big ideas about freedom and finding honest work in a town. He was caught 5 days later, hiding in a hayloft 10 miles away. They paraded him through the village with chains around his ankles. The Lord made him dig a new latrine pit with bare hands, then had him flogged in front of the manor hall. His name is never spoken aloud now. The kids whisper it like he's a ghost, but still. The idea sits there in your chest like something too big to swallow. You mention it to your wife one night, when the kids are asleep and the fire is low and soft with only the occasional crackle. You say it like a joke. What if we just left? She doesn't laugh, doesn't answer right away either, just stares into the flames. Then she says, "Where would we go?" You say, "A town. Any town. We'd find work. Maybe even get paid for it." She shakes her head, not in disagreement but in disbelief. "And if they catch us?" You don't have a good answer, but her eyes say she's not laughing either. The seed has been planted in both of you now. Over the next few days you start paying closer attention to travellers, merchants, pilgrims, tinkers, anyone who passes through. You ask questions when it seems safe. What towns are hiring? What trades are in need? You pretend you're just curious. No one suspects you're memorising the roads, the landmarks, the river crossings. One man, a fat merchant with a missing tooth and a sharp tongue, mentions a weaver's guild in Nottingham looking for apprentices. You tuck that detail away like gold. Your wife talks to Alice, whose cousin once lived in a town where serfs had escaped and simply changed their names. Lived openly, worked as freemen. She swears it's true. She also swears her goat speaks Latin when no one's around. Still, hope is hope. You start putting things aside. Quietly. A bit of barley here. A slice of dried pork there. A sewing needle. A flint stone. Rope. You hide them in a small sack under the floorboards, under a loose plank you found by accident one day while chasing a rat. The hiding place feels sacred. Every item you add feels like a prayer. Then the reeve announces a new set of labour days for the manor's field, one more week than usual, to make up for the poor harvest, he says, as if that's your fault. He doesn't even flinch while adding it, doesn't look you in the eye. That night your wife looks at you across the fire and says, "Nottingham then?" You don't say yes. You don't say anything. But she begins packing the thread she's been saving, and you know the answer. You choose your moment carefully. A holy day. Half the village will be at the church. The rest will be nursing hangovers or chasing children who've wrapped themselves in wildflower garlands and declared themselves saints. You slip out just after dawn, a bundle slung over your back, your youngest child wrapped in your wife's arms, the older two walking silently beside you. No words, just footsteps. You take the path through the woods, keeping off the road. The forest feels ancient, like it's seen this kind of escape before. Branches don't snag you, the wind doesn't betray you. Even the birds seem quieter, as if holding their breath. The first night you camp under a leaning tree and eat cold bread. Your children fall asleep instantly, their bodies still used to the rhythm of labour. You and your wife stay awake, listening for shouts, for dogs, for hoofbeats. None come. The second day you pass a small stream and wash your feet. Your wife hums as she wrings out a cloth. You haven't seen her hum in weeks. That night she lets herself smile for the first time in what feels like a year. You make it to the edge of a town by the fourth day. Not Nottingham, not yet, but close. A market town with a mill and a church and people too busy to care where you came from. You barter an old wooden spoon for a bit of cheese. You ask about the road ahead. You change your names. Nothing grand. Just enough to throw off a curious steward. Your children become siblings instead of sons and daughters. Your wife pretends to be a widow. You say you're a thatcher looking for work. It's not entirely untrue. There's a debate among the fugitives, you later learn. Is freedom something you earn or something you take? You never join the debate. You're too busy surviving. And that, in itself, feels like a kind of victory. You still think about the village sometimes, about the house you built, the tree where you first kissed your wife, the fire pit where your children learn to sit quietly with soup and stories. You miss it. But not enough to go back. Because out here, every day is yours. No lord, no reeve, no ledger. Just the sound of your own footsteps, and the knowledge that they're finally going somewhere you chose. You've walked long enough now to feel the road in your bones. Your feet are calloused like old wood, and the dust of a dozen villages has settled into the creases of your skin. But when you see the spires of the monastery rise in the distance, tall, proud, and carved like someone tried to bribe God with stone, you can't help but feel a little cheated. Not because it isn't beautiful. It is, staggeringly so. But because for all your toil and taxes and prayers, nothing you've ever touched has looked like that. Your wife whistles low beside you, the baby asleep on her back. "That's the church," she says. You nod. Though really, it's more than a church. It's a whole estate, a fortress of faith. You've heard of places like this, where monks live in silence, where their walls are stacked with books, and where their gardens grow herbs no serf has ever seen. People speak of them with awe, and just a hint of resentment. You're hoping for work, anything, a day in the fields, a week repairing walls, food, coin, shelter for the night. But as you approach the gate, it becomes painfully clear. These monks are not poor. Their robes are thick and spotless, their sandals are leather, not wood, and the man who greets you, though smiling, has the kind of clean hands that have never hauled a stone in their life. "God's peace be upon you," he says. "Are you pilgrims?" You almost laugh. Pilgrims. That would explain your ragged clothes, your sunburned faces, your exhaustion. But no, pilgrims choose their suffering. You just inherited yours. "We're looking for work," you say. "Just a day or two. We can labour, my wife can sew, the boy can gather kindling." The monk nods, and his smile dims slightly, like he's suddenly remembered what poverty smells like. "We might have use for hands." "We are, after all, God's humble servants." You try not to glance at the silver buckle on his belt. You spend that afternoon mending stone in the outer garden. It's clean, trimmed, far too perfect to be real. The fruit trees are orderly, the vegetables lined up like monks at prayer. The soil is dark and rich. No weeds, no smell of manure, just rosemary and fresh earth and something faintly medicinal. It feels like you're walking through a painting, a dream. Meanwhile, your wife works in the laundry, your eldest stacks firewood, and your daughter helps gather herbs under the eye of a novice, who speaks in single, slow syllables, like she thinks your child is a goat. At dinner, they give you broth, thick, hot, rich with meat and lentils. It's better than anything you've eaten in months, maybe years. You eat slowly, not wanting to waste a drop, but also trying not to look like someone who hasn't seen meat since the last wedding feast. That night, you sleep in the guest shed, wrapped in wool blankets. Your wife lies beside you, breathing steady, and you listen to the wind hum through the monastery walls. It's the first night in months where you're not terrified of waking up to someone's boot at your neck. The next morning, after chores, you're brought into the scriptorium. A monk there is copying texts, slowly, painstakingly, dipping a quill into ink made from crushed oak galls. He gestures to a bench. "Sit," he says, eyes on his page. "You can read?" You shake your head. He finally looks at you. "Want to?" You pause. It's not something anyone has ever asked you. "Read? You?" He places a piece of parchment in front of you. It's full of lines and loops. He points to a letter. "That's A, like the Almighty." He traces the next one. "That's B, like bread you grin." Now we're talking. You spend half the morning sounding out syllables. Your tongue trips, your brain aches, but it lights something inside you, a fire you didn't know could still catch. The monk says nothing more, just nods when you get something right, frowns when you mix up a P and a Q. By the end of the hour you can spell ab, which might not seem like much, but to you it's the opening of a door you didn't even know existed. That afternoon, you're sent to help in the storage cellars. That's when you see it, the full extent of the church's wealth. Barrels of salted meat, sacks of grain, jars of preserved fruit, bolts of cloth, wine. So much wine. You could feed your entire village through winter with what they have tucked away here like it's just another Tuesday. And it stings. Because this place, this monastery with its carved altars and golden chalices, was built with labour like yours, with taxes wrung from muddy hands, with grain collected in God's name but stored behind locked doors. You say none of this aloud, you just carry the barrels, nod at the brothers and keep your face still. But that night, back in the guest shed, you turn to your wife and whisper, "They have more food than our whole village." She sighs. They pray harder. You both know that's not the reason. There's an old debate, quiet, whispered behind hedgerows and inside barns after dark, about the church. Is it holy, or is it just another lord in a robe? The priests preach charity, but take their tithe before the baker gets his crust. They bless the manor but rarely bless the fields. And now, here you are, scrubbing floors for monks with softer beds than any you've ever dreamed of. Still, you're grateful. You don't bite the hand that feeds, even if that hand is wearing rings. On the third day, the monk who taught you your first letters offers you a small square of parchment and a worn quill. "Practice," he says. You do. clumsily. Letters wobble, ink smears. But you write your name, not the one you were born with, the one you chose when you fled. It feels more real than anything you've ever held. You leave the next morning. The monks give you a loaf of bread and a bit of salted pork. No coin, no thanks, just nods. But you walk away with full bellies, a quiet mind, and one small scrap of parchment tucked inside your tunic. On it, 5 letters, slanted, crooked, yours. For the first time, you carry not just tools, not just bread, but words. You wake up coughing, hard and dry, and the first thought in your head is, not again, not another sickness, not after all you've outrun. Your ribs ache with every breath, your mouth tastes like ash, and your head feels like someone stuffed it with wet wool. You try to sit up, but the world tilts and rolls, like a cart with a busted axle. Your wife leans over you, her face pale and tight, hair clinging to her forehead with sweat. You've been out for a day and a half, she says. We thought you were... She doesn't finish. You both know the word she's trying not to say. The child stands in the corner silent, eyes wide with worry. You blink at her, try to smile. You fail. It's not the plague, thank the saints. There's no swelling, no blackened skin, just fever, chills, and a cough that rattles like beans in a jar. Your wife says you've had it before, the lung rot, as the villagers used to call it. But this time it's meaner, heavier, like it's sinking hooks into your chest. She tries what she knows. Onion broth, hot stones wrapped in cloth, a poultice of mustard and garlic slapped on your chest that stings like betrayal. You lie there, half dead, swearing silently that if this thing doesn't kill you, you'll never complain about fieldwork again. You start to think about medicine, or the sorry medieval version of it. Back in the village, the healer was old Britha, who smelled like mould and claimed to know the secret names of bones. She'd once fed you a brew made from boiled snails and rabbit droppings to fix a rash you got after sleeping too close to the cow. You were sick for a week, but the rash went away. She called it a miracle. You called it survival. Then there were the travelling quacks, the peddlers with leather pouches full of powders, stones and dried lizards. They'd roll into town once a season, slap some salve on your sores, and vanish with your last penny. One even claimed he could drive out a toothache by pressing a frog against your cheek. You'd never seen a frog hop faster. The church, of course, offered spiritual medicine, prayers, holy water, exorcisms for the particularly sneezy. The priest back home once insisted your neighbour's leg infection was due to sinful thoughts. The leg fell off anyway. And the monks? Their medicine was written in books you couldn't read, filled with Latin scribbles and illustrations of plants with faces. They had jars of powders you weren't allowed to touch, and a constant supply of honey, vinegar and piety. You watched one treat a broken arm by wrapping it in wool and reading psalms until the patient passed out. He survived, mostly due to stubbornness. You once heard of a doctor from Italy, educated, well-travelled, wore spectacles made of polished glass. He visited a baron's manor and was said to know more than anyone alive, prescribed saffron tea and bloodletting in equal measure. You wonder if he would know what to do with this hacking mess of yours. Probably bleed you dry, call it a success, and ask for a goose in return. The truth is, if you get really sick in your world, you die. Slowly or quickly, in a bed or in the dirt. There's no real help, just guesses. Some smart, some desperate. All soaked in superstition. You lie there for days. You drift in and out of dreams. Memories of the village, of the harvest, of the night you left. Sometimes you hear your daughter singing softly beside the bed. Sometimes you think you see your father's face just beyond the edge of sleep, shaking his head and muttering about wasting good breath on nonsense. Your wife never leaves your side for long. She chews herbs when she thinks you're not looking, hoping to ward off whatever it is. You want to tell her to stop worrying, but all that comes out is a wheeze. Eventually the fever breaks. Your skin is slick with sweat, and your breath still comes in gasps, but the weight starts to lift. Your head clears, your eyes stop spinning. You're weak, like a sapling after a storm, but you're alive. Barely. You sit up for the first time and feel like a newborn calf. Wobbly, confused, mildly annoyed at the sun. Your wife helps you to the doorway, and you breathe the fresh air like it's a gift. It smells like wood smoke and damp soil, with just a hint of sheep. You missed this. That night you eat porridge, slowly. You can't taste much, but it's warm and thick and feels like victory. There's a debate you've overheard before, between the healer types, the clergy, and the wandering so-called scholars. What causes sickness? Some say bad air. Some say imbalanced humours. Others blame demons or sin or the position of the moon. But no one really knows. Not in your lifetime. Maybe not ever. You just know it kills. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it leaves you with more grey in your beard and a deeper gratitude for broth. You spend the next week regaining your strength. You help around the cottage again, slowly, like someone testing the limits of a badly repaired cartwheel. Your daughter braids your hair while laughing at how pale you are. Your wife insists you still look half dead. You thank her, and through it all the awareness sits in your gut like a stone. This will happen again. Maybe not soon, maybe not to you, but someone will cough and everyone will turn to watch. Everyone will remember the last time someone coughed and then disappeared behind a curtain. Because here, sickness is never a surprise, just a shadow that walks a few steps behind you, waiting for the right moment. But for now, you've outrun it. Again, and in this life, that's enough. Night falls like a velvet curtain, thick and absolute, the kind of dark that hums in your ears if you stare into it long enough. The fire crackles low, lazy with its warmth, and you sit in a circle with your family and the few neighbours brave enough to gather in these uncertain times. The air smells of peat smoke, drying herbs, and the last of the roast turnips. Outside, the cold creeps along the ground like a curious animal, poking through gaps in the wall and brushing your ankles with icy fingers. But in here, huddled around the hearth, stories are about to begin, and that warmth runs deeper than flame. It always starts the same way. Someone shifts on the stool, someone else clears their throat, and then the familiar words. Did I ever tell you the tale of... Fill the air like a trumpet call made from whispers. Tonight, it's old Merrick who begins. His beard is thick with ash, and he smells vaguely of onions and pipe smoke. He leans in close, his eyes glittering with the kind of mischief that says he's about to lie spectacularly. Long ago, before even your grandmother's grandmother was born, he begins, there was a man with a beard so long he could tie it around his waist like a belt. And one day, that beard caught fire while he was praying. The children gasp. Your youngest pulls the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She's heard this story before, dozens of times, but it doesn't matter. Stories aren't just about surprise. They're about rhythm, familiarity, comfort with a twist of wonder. Another log pops in the hearth, and Merrick continues. The man with the beard becomes a wandering monk. He puts out the fire with a holy sneeze. He tames a wolf using only an apple. He defeats a devil who speaks in riddles and demands pigs as tribute. It's ridiculous. It's utterly charming. It's exactly what everyone needs. And it's not just Merrick. Once he's finished, Joan takes over. She's sharper, quicker with her tongue. Her tales are darker, of witches who turn milk sour and walk backward at dusk, of dead lovers who knock on windows at midnight, of changelings left in cradles that scream in languages no one can understand. Her voice lowers, faces lean in. Even the fire seems to hush. Then your wife joins in. She doesn't consider herself a storyteller, but you know better. She tells a tale from her childhood about a boy who once found a coin buried in a field and used it to buy his mother a goose, and how that goose laid a golden egg. The boy grew greedy, killed the goose, and was cursed to dig trenches for eternity. He still digs, she says, raising an eyebrow. Some say he's under your bed, listening. Your daughter squeals and hides under a blanket. Your son tries not to laugh with his mouth full of beans. The stories go on, one after another, flowing like honey. Some are old, older than memory, passed down through centuries. Some are newer, freshly woven from recent gossip and a dash of imagination. One man insists he saw a fairy ring in the woods that wasn't there the day before. Another swears a traveller told him dragons once slept under the hill behind the mill, and that their bones are still there, warming the earth. You contribute too. A tale about a donkey that outwitted a tax collector. Possibly true, possibly not. The laughter it draws is real, though, and that's what matters. Because this is how truth works in your world. Loose around the edges, wrapped in a coat of fiction to keep it warm. No one needs these stories to be accurate. They just need them to mean something, to make the world feel a little more magical and a little less cruel. Every village has its own stockpile of tales, some shared, some fiercely local. You once visited a hamlet where they claimed the river sang at night, another where they insisted a black rooster would grant wishes if fed salted bread. It doesn't matter if it's true. What matters is that people believe, or want to. There's a reason stories are stronger than sermons. The priest can preach about obedience and fear, about divine punishment and heavenly reward, but a good story sneaks in through the cracks. It makes you feel something. It lets you laugh at the devil and pity the saint. It lets you believe in something softer than justice and more personal than salvation. Some nights the stories are so good that no one wants to go home. People linger long after the fire has shrunk to embers, wrapped in cloaks and wonder. But eventually the chill pushes everyone back into the night. The door creaks shut, the shutters are latched and the village goes quiet again, except for the story still flickering behind eyelids. Your daughter, wide-eyed and buzzing, refuses to sleep. She demands to know if the changeling in Joan's tale was really swapped as a baby. You shrug. Could be. Might be someone in this very village, she gasps, then turns her suspicious little eyes on her brother. He throws a pillow at her. You smile and pull the blankets up to their chins. Later, you lie awake, listening to your wife's breathing and the wind huffing against the walls. You think about how, even in a world that breaks your back and steals your time, people still find space for dragons, still light candles against darkness, still build invisible bridges between one another using nothing but words. There's a scholarly debate you once heard from a wandering friar, whether stories are sinful distractions or divine gifts. He argued both sides, said parables were holy, but idle tales were dangerous. You told him a tale about a rooster that outwitted death, and he laughed so hard he spilled wine down his robe. Maybe that's your answer, because in the end, stories are survival, not just from cold or famine or lords or plague, but from despair. They remind you that joy still exists, that people are clever and brave and stupid in ways that matter. They give you a place to run when the world feels too sharp, and sometimes, if you're lucky, they give you a way to come back, so when morning comes and the frost creeps across the fields, and you haul yourself out of bed to fetch water and feed the fire, you carry the stories with you. Tucked between the aches and the chores, keeping you warm, it starts with the air, crisper, lighter, carrying the scent of cut grass and soil that's finally stopped weeping water. The sun hits differently now, slanting low across the field in golden beams that make everything look blessed, even the weeds, and for the first time in months, maybe in a whole year, your shoulders don't hunch with dread when you step outside, because today's the day. The harvest is in, and, miracle of miracles, it's a good one. Not just better than last year, which was a rodent-infested disaster, or not as bad as the year before, when rain drowned everything but the priest's sermons. No, this harvest is honest-to-God good. The grain is fat in the hand, the barley ripe, the beans plump, and the root vegetables enormous. Your wife yanked a turnip out of the ground this morning that could double as a murder weapon. You held it up to the sky like it was the Holy Grail. You're not alone in your joy. The whole village feels it. There's a buzz on the green. People are singing again. Real songs with verses they halfway remember, and harmonies that fall apart into laughter. Children chase each other between the drying racks, weaving through lines of linen and bundles of wheat. Even the dogs seem happier, tails wagging with renewed purpose as they beg for dropped crusts and lick stray bits of fat from cooking pots. There's a rhythm to a good harvest day. You wake early, but not out of obligation, out of excitement. You pull on clothes that still smell of the fields and set out to finish the last of the bundling, working alongside neighbours who've gone from grumbling co-workers to actual companions. When someone's sack breaks, everyone helps. When someone cuts their finger on a scythe, 4 people offer cloth strips and unsolicited herbal advice. That doesn't happen during planting season, or winter, but today, generosity runs like ale, and speaking of ale, there's so much of it. By midday, the brewing has already begun in earnest. The village alewife, Maud, not your Maud, another one, rounder, louder, and always slightly drunk, has a cauldron bubbling so ferociously that it looks like she's conjuring something. She probably is. Her ale's been known to make grown men speak fluent French and confess childhood sins. By sundown, the feast begins. It's not official. There's no proclamation from the steward, no blessing from the priest, though he shows up later, mysteriously when the pies come out. It just happens. A spontaneous eruption of joy. Blankets are laid on the grass, baskets opened, trenchers piled high. There's bread that didn't burn, cheeses that haven't moulded, much. Pies stuffed with everything from meat to mystery berries, and one truly stunning roast goose that someone swears just wandered into the cottage and volunteered. You don't ask questions, you eat and drink and drink. and somewhere between your third and fourth cup of ale, you find yourself on your feet, clapping along to a song with a chorus you barely know, and a rhythm that's been mangled by 3 different tambourines. Someone plays a fiddle, badly. A girl with hair like fire jumps up on a barrel and starts dancing with her boots unlaced. The miller's wife attempts a jig and twists her ankle, but insists she was done anyway. You haven't seen joy like this in years, and it's not just about the food or the drink, it's what the harvest represents. Survival, safety, a break in the storm. When the land gives generously, it feels like a divine nod, a moment where the world, for once, didn't try to kill you, it fed you instead. There's a fringe belief, never spoken too loud, that good harvests mean the old gods are pleased, the ones that live in trees and streams and forgotten corners of the field. The priest says it's nonsense, of course, but you've seen old Agnes leave apples on the stump near the East Meadow, and you're pretty sure the reeve spit over his left shoulder before harvesting the first row. So, maybe the gods still listen. There's one last surprise before the evening's done. The village blacksmith, a man named Ellis, whose arms could crush boulders, and whose smile rarely sees daylight, brings out a cake. An actual cake. Sweet, spiced, and shaped like a sheaf of wheat. No one knew he could bake. No one knew he wanted to bake. He just shrugs and says, "My mother taught me." I was waiting for the right time. The whole village applauds, even the steward shows up, just long enough to murmur something about a prosperous yield and make an awkward toast. Then he awkwardly slips away before anyone can mention taxes. You stay long after the sun's gone. The stars blink into view, bright and smug above your heads. Someone builds a second fire, and around it, the older folks begin to tell stories again. You hear laughter, yes, but also something deeper. Relief, gratitude, maybe even hope. And as the night wears on, and your children fall asleep curled against your side, and your wife leans her head on your shoulder and sighs like a woman finally safe, you realise you're not thinking about tomorrow. Not thinking about lords or labour dues or whether the pigs are about to get sick again. You're just here, in this moment, surrounded by food, warmth, and people you love. And the miracle is not that everything is perfect. It's that, for once, it's enough. There's a debate always about how much joy peasants are allowed, whether you've earned a moment like this, whether the church approves, whether the Lord would consider this a disruption of order. You know what you think? You think screw the order? You think there's nothing more orderly than people coming together to celebrate not dying. You think this, sore feet, full belly, and music echoing into the stars, is as close to heaven as most of you will ever get. And tonight, that's just fine. The frost is back on the grass in the morning, curled like silver thread along the blades, catching the weak sun in 100 tiny mirrors. You see your breath again when you speak, and the chickens complain more loudly than usual as you coax them out of the coop. There's a crispness to the air now, a stillness that comes only after the harvest is long over, and the fields have gone quiet. The party is finished. The bread's been eaten. The barrels scraped dry, and the village, still nursing full bellies and sore feet, sinks back into the rhythm of winter preparation. This is the season of stacking, storing, mending. Everything that wasn't tied down during the feast is now getting fixed. Tools are sharpened. Walls are patched. That one broken gate gets its 15th repair job using twine, willpower, and creative profanity. You find yourself spending longer hours indoors, not from laziness, but from necessity. The daylight shrinks like a wool tunic in the wash, and the sun seems almost embarrassed to show up at all. Your hands crack from the cold even with gloves. Your knees ache, and you start noticing just how many holes there are in the roof of your cottage when the wind picks up. But the quiet isn't unpleasant. Not after the storm of the summer, the revolt, the illness. You can finally hear yourself think, though mostly what you think about is how to keep warm, how much firewood you've got left, and whether the dried apples will last until Candlemas. The village seems smaller now, tighter, like it's pulling its cloak around itself, trying to stay cosy. And people are closer too, literally huddled together during morning chores, fireside gatherings, or just waiting for the communal oven to warm up enough to bake bread. You hear more stories now, quieter ones. Not the loud harvest tales, but the soft, strange ones that only come out when the nights grow long and everyone's a little more willing to believe in ghosts. Your daughter tells you one she heard from the blacksmith's apprentice about a spirit that lives inside the hearth and must be thanked before you sweep the ashes. You thank it, just in case. Can't hurt. You find your mind drifting more than usual. While you mend your boots or stir the evening pottage, you think back over the year, the times you nearly gave up, the fear that sat on your chest like a stone during the worst of the sickness, the rebellion, the escape, the long walk to somewhere new, and now you're here, still poor, still working, still uncertain, but standing, and that counts for something. One morning the Reeve visits, not your old Reeve, the one you fled from. This one's younger, local, hasn't yet grown into the full measure of his future bitterness. He brings word from the town council. A new system is being tried, one where labourers might earn coin instead of owing time. It's experimental, controversial, and mostly just on paper for now. But still, coin for labour, not obligation, not fear, work, paid. It's not a revolution, not really, but it smells faintly like change. There's a quiet debate in the village. Not a shouting match, but a murmur that flows through hallways and between hay bales. Some are suspicious. "What's the catch?" they ask. Others are hopeful. A few, your wife among them, are cautiously optimistic. "If it's real," she says, folding linens in the soft morning light, "then maybe our children will work for themselves. Not for someone who thinks their blood makes them gods." The idea is thrilling and terrifying. What do you even do with freedom if you've never really had it? It's like giving a falcon a library card. You start to think about teaching your children what little you know about coin, how to save it, how not to get cheated, how a good pair of boots can make the difference between a sore back and a good day. You imagine them growing up with choices, maybe not many, but some. That would be enough. Meanwhile, the work of surviving continues. You dig a new root cellar when the old one starts to smell more like regret than food. Your wife barters 2 jars of honey for a bolt of cloth to make new tunics. Your daughter stitches little stars into the hem of hers and refuses to say why. You let her have the secret. Your son builds a bird trap, fails miserably, then spends 2 hours talking to a robin perched on the fence post. You watch, wondering if he's talking to the bird or just practicing being understood. The world beyond the village creeps in through rumour. A new king has said something bold. A distant war has ended, or begun, depending on who you ask. A nearby town burned down after someone misread a candle, and a cart of hay had an unfortunate meeting. You shake your head. "Could have happened here," you mutter. Your wife raises an eyebrow. "It did," she says. "You just never owned up to it." The weather shifts again. Snow threatens but doesn't quite arrive. Just icy wind and mornings where the water bucket freezes over, forcing you to break the top layer with a stick like you're digging through stone. The chickens huddle together for warmth. The goats complain with theatrical sighs. The cat has permanently relocated to the warmest spot by the hearth, and good luck getting her to move. And still, life goes on. You fall into the pattern of winter. Mend, patch, tell stories, argue about whether that noise on the roof is wind or a very polite ghost. You fix the latch on the door again. You butcher the last pig with a heaviness in your chest, knowing it means no more bacon until spring. You count your jars of pickled onions and silently promise to save the last one for a special day. Though what counts as special anymore, you're not quite sure. You talk more, with your wife, with the children. There's time now, time to reflect, to ask questions, to imagine. What if we saved enough coin to buy a cow? What if we planted an orchard? What if we left again, went farther this time? You don't answer every question. You let some float in the air, settling gently in the rafters. There's a scholarly debate you once overheard, whether winter is a dead season or a resting one. You've decided it's both. Things look dead, sure, but underneath, seeds are still there, waiting, thinking, gathering strength. Maybe people are like that too. You lie in bed one night staring at the ceiling, listening to your family breathe beside you. The wind scratches at the walls, but the fire is steady and the roof holds. And for the first time in a long while, you don't dread what's next. You wonder. Because maybe next year will be better. Not perfect, just better. And maybe, after everything, after the dirt, the pain, the fear, the cold, you've earned that hope. It's fitting that the morning you die begins just like any other. There's nothing dramatic about it. No thunder, no omen, no whisper from the heavens that your time is up. Just a cold draft slipping through the cracks in the door, the soft creak of your joints as you pull yourself upright, and the same bowl of thin pottage waiting for you by the hearth. If you had known it was your last sunrise, maybe you would have kissed your wife a little longer. Maybe you would have told your children one more story. Or maybe not. Maybe this quiet, ordinary morning is exactly how you'd choose to go. You've felt it coming, haven't you? That slow unravelling. The way your hands shake a little more each day. How your breath comes in short huffs just from chopping kindling. Your body's been sending the memo for months, but you've ignored it. Like you've ignored 100 things in your life. Taxes, back pain, that one goat that always looks at you funny. The signs are there. Still, it's not until midday that something gives. One moment you're in the field, pulling weeds from around the winter greens, and the next, the world tilts, your knees buckle, and the ground rushes up with surprising grace. There's no pain, just a strange, soft weight, like you're sinking into warm mud. You hear shouting, your wife's voice, the scuffle of feet. But it all starts to sound very far away. They carry you back to the cottage, or maybe drag. You're not sure. You drift in and out, aware of the ceiling above you, the crack in the beams, the smell of burning sage someone lit to keep away bad spirits. That's Agnes. Of course it is. She always said you'd die before her. You remember laughing at that once. You're not laughing now. Your wife sits beside you, her hand wrapped around yours. Her grip is firmer than you expected. You squeeze back, just barely. And in that touch is everything. The fields you worked side by side, the children you raised through lean winters, the nights you shivered together under too thin blankets. A whole life wrapped in one final moment of skin against skin. Outside, the sun dips behind the trees, casting gold across the cottage walls. It feels warm on your cheek. You focus on that. Not the failing of your lungs, not the way your eyes blur, but the sun. You want to remember what warmth feels like. There's an old belief, one you heard as a boy, that when someone dies, the birds carry their last breath into the sky. You don't know if it's true, but the idea is a comfort. You picture your breath rising through the thatch, curling into the air, caught by the wings of a sparrow, or maybe a goose, a big, loud, unruly goose. That would be more fitting. Your children are crying now. Your eldest kneels by the fire, pretending he isn't wiping his eyes. Your daughter holds your hand to her face and murmurs things you can't quite hear. You want to tell them it's all right, that this isn't a tragedy, it's just what happens. No serf dies in a castle. No one gets a statue or a song. You go out the way you came in, quiet, in the dirt, surrounded by the people who kept you human in a world that tried very hard not to. The priest shows up muttering Latin over you. You don't listen. You never liked his voice. Too nasal. Instead, you focus on your wife's breath. It's steady, measured. She's braver than all of them, has been since the day you met her. You squeeze her hand one last time and hope she understands everything you can't say. Then just like that, you're gone. No fanfare, no burst of light, just stillness. They bury you in the churchyard, wrapped in your best tunic, the one with only 2 patches. The village turns out, even the steward. He says something vaguely respectful. Agnes throws rosemary into the grave. Your daughter sobs, and your wife stands straight, chin up, the same way she always did when the world dared to throw more weight on her shoulders. She's the last to leave. And now you are part of the land. You return to the soil you spent your whole life working. Your bones settle into the same dirt that stained your hands for decades. You become one more root in a very old system, one more story whispered in winter, one more name said by candlelight. The seasons move on, of course. Spring comes, the village plants again. Your children grow older, and eventually their children learn your name. Not in books, not in sermons, but in stories. They say you were kind, a good worker, fierce when needed, a stubborn mule when the mood struck. They say you once danced barefoot on the green during a harvest feast, that you stood up to a tax collector and lived to laugh about it, that you taught your daughter how to catch fish with her bare hands. No one mentions your rebellion, or the night you ran, or the time you stole a whole smoked ham and blamed it on a haunted breeze. That part of your story becomes fuzzier. But that's how legacy works here. It softens, it grows, like moss on stone, and someday, long after your bones have melted into the earth, someone will walk past the crooked marker at the edge of the churchyard and ask, "Who was buried here?" And someone else will answer, "That was a good man, a serf, lived hard, died honest." And maybe that's enough, because for all the lords and kings and bishops who will be forgotten, your story, mud-caked, quiet, stubborn, stays. And now that the story's finished, you lie there, tucked under your blankets, the hum of your fan in the background, maybe a light still flickering softly by your side, and you let it settle in. What it meant to live like that. To wake with the sun, your body already aching, to work until the stars returned. To carry not only the weight of a lord's demand, but the quiet, relentless hope that your life could still be yours somehow. Being a serf in medieval England wasn't about grand battles or royal intrigue. It was about scraping by, inch by inch, season by season. It was digging your hands into frozen earth because someone told you to, and still finding a reason to laugh around a fire later that night. It was surviving one day, so you could maybe survive the next. And in that long, muddy grind, you built something that history doesn't always remember. But your village did. Your family did. You mattered to them. You weren't free, not in the way the lords were, but your life, your stubborn, threadbare, deeply human life, was still yours. Your choices, small though they were, rippled out, through rebellion, through stories, through kindness, through love. You were a root in the soil they all stood on. So tonight, as you drift off, remember, history isn't only shaped by crowns and swords. It's also shaped by hands in the dirt, backs bent with labour, and quiet voices around a fire keeping stories alive. You are one of them now, and for once, after a lifetime of cold, you're warm.